What are the top 10 digital transformation YouTube videos from 2024? That's what we're going to cover here in episode 203 of Transformation Ground Control.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. This podcast features technology agnostic and international discussions related to digital strategy, software selection, implementation, change management, business process optimization, and everything else you need to know to make your digital transformation project successful. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you. Now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Ground control to Major.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 203. My name is Eric Kimberling here at Darian Chwialkowski. Darian, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Excited for today's episode. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting Group. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And one of the things we do on this podcast is obviously we cover all things related to digital transformation, including the people, process, technology, and strategy aspects of change, which, by the way, is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, produced by Major Tom Productions. But one of the things we also do at Third Stage Consulting is we put out a lot of YouTube content. And that's what we want to talk about here today is really count down the top 10 most viewed YouTube videos that we published in 2024. So tell us a little bit about this list, Darian. You helped us compile it. What were some of your just general observations about the list here before we dive into it?
Yeah, so what we did is we took all of the views from any video published on Eric's channel in 2024, and we took the ones that you guys seem to like the most according to views. So this list will be the top 10 highest viewed videos of 2024 from Eric's channel.
Yeah, it's interesting to see which ones made the list, which ones didn't. One of the things that you pointed out, just not to be too much of a spoiler here, but you pointed out that there were a lot of longer form like training videos, which I just started doing last year. Is the first time I had really done these longer form, like 1.5 to 2 hour deep dive training videos. And those seem to do really well on this list this year, didn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the viewers, you guys will see as we go through the rankings, there's a lot in here and they're ranking pretty high. So you guys must enjoy watching those and learning what those training courses do for you.
Yeah. So we'll play you the full clips for the shorter videos. And then for the longer videos, we're going to play you just a kind of a snippet from the long video. We don't want to overwhelm you with a 20-hour episode of the ground control here today, although I'm sure everyone would love it if we went for 20 hours. But we'll try to condense some of these longer videos down to just give you a flavor for what is in those videos. But, starting off at number 10, we have lessons from Hershey's historic SAP ERP implementation failure. That was a video that got just over 3,000 views in 2024. And it's always interesting because people love to hear about failures. I could put a video out about a super successful case study and put out another video about a failure, and the failure is going to get more attention every time. I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's just because of the shock value or whatever, but the Hershey's case is really interesting because it's such a well-known implementation failure from a couple decades ago. So we'll roll you this clip here. We'll play you this video that did really well on our YouTube channel. This is lessons from Hershey's SAP failure. So it's commonly known that Hershey's failed in its ERP implementation. But how do we know? What are the metrics that point to the fact that it was a failure? Well, first of all, let's start with the budget. The budget was a $112 million SAP implementation. The company was implementing a legacy SAP product called R3 back in the late 90s. And they were doing this as a way to really modernize their systems, modernize their supply chain, and be able to scale on its way from being a $1 billion company to a $5 billion company at the time. But what happened at the end of the day, once they went through this project, is not only did it cost $112 million, which is a lot of money, especially back then, but it also resulted in Hershey's losing $150 million in sales at the time they went live. And the reason for this, which I'll get into a little bit later, is because they couldn't ship product that they had in stock largely. So that was part of the problem, is they couldn't track the inventory and they couldn't get the inventory out the door to customers when they needed it at a peak seasonal time. And so the key thing here that I alluded to is the fact that much of this inventory was in stock. The physical stock was there, but because of the system failure, people couldn't see where the inventory was and they couldn't ship it to the customers when they needed it. And what this did is it resulted in Hershey's having a 20% drop in profit the quarter that they went live on the new system. And it also resulted in an 8% decrease in drop in their stock price just in one day once this news was announced. So the financial implications and the financial results of this implementation point to a massive failure that most organizations want to avoid. So what I want to do next is not just talk about these symptoms, these things that arose from the failure, but talk about the root causes of why did this project fail? What did they do wrong and how did it translate into those negative financial results? And that's what I'll cover next. First, let's start with the overall implementation strategy and plan, which was highly flawed, in my opinion, based on what I've read during research of this. And first of all, let's look at the overall implementation duration. The implementation duration was recommended to be 48 months, which is about 4 years. Seems like a long time, but for a large organization, that seems pretty reasonable. But what Hershey's did is they pushed back on that duration and said they wanted to try to get it done in 30 months, not 48. Reason being is that this is in the late 90s, and there was a fear that the Y2K situation was going to get the best of them. In other words, back in the 90s, a lot of companies were worried about their legacy mainframe systems, which was what Hershey's was on. They were worried that the 2-digit year code, so in other words, 1999, would be entered in a system as 99, not 1999. People were worried that once 2000 hit and it switched to 00 in the system, that the systems would all crash. Now, that never happened to anyone, by the way, so it makes you wonder if this was a real fear or if it was generated and produced and manufactured by the software industry, but that's a whole topic for another video. But the point is that Hershey's was afraid of Y2K. They knew they had to switch their systems faster. They thought they needed to switch their systems faster, so they compressed that time frame into an unrealistic 30-month duration. They also opted for a big bang approach, largely because of this 30-month timeline. They wanted to streamline things and go with a big bang approach, meaning that they were going to deploy all the modules and all the functionality all at once, overnight, flip the switch onto the new system. That's a highly risky endeavor that companies actually used to do back in the 90s and early 2000s. You don't hear about it as much nowadays because I think a lot of organizations understand the risks and they're not willing to take that risk. But at the time, Hershey's went with a big bang approach and they flipped the switch on a lot of functionality almost too fast, faster than the organization can handle it, clearly. Perhaps even more damaging was that they limited their testing. So they didn't test the system the way they should have. They scaled back on their testing cycles, largely because, again, they were trying to compress their implementation into a 30-month time frame when it probably should have been closer to the 48 months that was originally planned for. So testing was something that got off track, and I'm going to come back to that because that's a really important point, and one of the core root causes of why this project failed is because they didn't test some of the core critical processes that happened during the holiday season for a chocolate manufacturer. I'll come back to that point too. And then finally, as part of their implementation strategy and plan, they stockpiled some extra inventory in the event that there was a problem, but they only stockpiled 8 days on average of inventory. So they thought, we are increasing the number of days of inventory we have on hand. That should cover any outage that we might have or any problems that we might have, but it turns out that wasn't nearly enough. They should have had a lot more inventory on hand for the implementation. So these are some of the flaws and fatal mistakes that they made early in the implementation planning and the overall implementation strategy, and these are mistakes that most of us could avoid by taking a better path for the digital strategy. Now, somewhat related to the implementation planning and strategy is seasonality. And I'm going to call this out separately, though, because it's so important to Hershey's and it's so important to many organizations that we work with as well. When you're looking at your business, most of us have some sort of seasonality, some ebbs and flows in demand, and sales are increasing or dropping at certain times. We have resources that are being committed at certain times during peak seasonal periods. And that's generally the last time on a calendar that you want to go live with a new system. What happened in the case of Hershey's is that they originally planned to go live in the spring of 1999, but they clearly didn't hit that go live date, didn't end up going live till July, and even then they weren't ready for go live, but they still did go live right in July, which is really the peak of their season because they're ramping up production and shipments for Halloween and Christmas. So they go live in July 1999. It turns into a disaster. I'll talk more about why it was a disaster and what some of the symptoms were. But the point here is that they should never have gone live at a peak seasonal time. It may have meant that they should have just pushed off or delayed the project further and waited until things settled down and it was a lower seasonal spike and gone live then. That would have been a lot less risky, but they didn't do that. So that's a lesson we can take away here is, in general, just don't go live in the middle of your peak seasonal period. Another fatal flaw in the Hershey's case is that they didn't do adequate testing and training. And more specifically, they didn't do adequate testing and training of specific business processes that were specific to their peak seasonal times. So I mentioned a moment ago that they went live right at the peak seasonal time, which is not recommended, but they did. And what they found is that the system couldn't handle some of the exceptions and some of the things they would do as a business operationally during peak seasonal time. So for example, one thing that Hershey's was doing at the time is that they would have temporary warehouses to accommodate the extra inventory they needed to get ready for these peak seasonal times for Halloween and Christmas. And what happened was when they deployed SAP, the way they designed and built SAP, they didn't account for these temporary warehouses. So when all these orders started coming in the summer of 1999, when they went live with the new system, the temporary warehouses weren't there. It didn't show up in the system, so it looked like the inventory wasn't there. You go to enter an order for inventory that physically is there, but it's not in the system because that warehouse that's temporary didn't exist in the system. And this is a great example of how not only do you need to test stuff thoroughly, but you need to create scenarios that reflect your business. And what ended up happening here at Hershey's is that the IT department and the project team, the technical project team, was deploying this technology and making these decisions without operational inputs. So in other words, the operations people probably would have called a timeout and said, hey, what about these temporary warehouses? How do we handle that in this new system? And they would have worked through that and designed it accordingly. So that didn't happen, and therefore that's a big part of why the system failed, is because they didn't account for these key business processes, they didn't test it, and they didn't train people on how to use the software in a way that would accommodate these different business processes. Hershey's also suffered from some organizational issues at the time it was going through the implementation, not necessarily related to the project itself, but just in general. For example, the company did not have a CIO leading up to the implementation. I think they hired a CIO somewhere along the way during the implementation, but they didn't have one going into the implementation. So they didn't have really strong technical leadership at the time that they started the project. Another challenge is that there was a disconnect between IT and the business. I mentioned a moment ago that there were key business processes that were not considered and baked into the implementation because the IT people were driving the process and they were making decisions without enough input from operations, and they ended up overlooking a really critical part of their business and their operations during seasonal peak times. And lastly, Hershey's didn't appear to have experience or much experience deploying a technology initiative of this magnitude. They had deployed smaller, more isolated, limited technology projects in the past with their legacy systems, but they had never gone through an enterprise-wide implementation, and so they just didn't have that internal competency and experience. And when you combine that with the disconnect between IT and the business and the fact that there's no CIO, that created a perfect storm of organizational issues that contributed to the problem as well. Now, another thing to consider that Hershey's may not have, I don't know this for a fact, but I suspect they did not consider the cost of disruption. And what I mean by the cost of disruption is what happens if the project fails, or what happens if we have problems during the implementation. Most organizations are really good at planning and budgeting for the implementation itself, what they think it's going to cost to go through the implementation, but what they're not good at is quantifying the risk of what happens if we can't ship product. What happens if we can't close the books? What happens if we can't run payroll? What is that going to cost us? And in this case, as I mentioned at the top of the video, Hershey's lost $150 million in sales that they never recouped. And what's even worse is in many cases, customers, which were their end retailers, ended up switching from Hershey's and allocating more of those orders to Mars and some of the other competitors. So they lost business and they lost some customer loyalty as a result of that. And I'm not sure how you quantify that, but there is a cost associated with that as well. In addition, the stock price dropped by 8% overnight, literally overnight, once this news was announced, and investors and customers continued to lose confidence in the company. Now, the good news is that over time, Hershey's did figure things out. They did re-implement or try to go through the implementation again in the early 2000s, and apparently from what I've read, they were able to do that on time and on budget and went a lot more smoothly the second time around. So the good news is it appears that they learned from some of the mistakes they made, and they were able to rectify that in the early 2000s. And if you fast forward to now, there's news out recently that they're going through another digital transformation. I have no idea how it's going. They're not a client of ours, so I don't know if it's on track. If it's not, I'm not sure what the situation is, but it is worth noting that there's key mistakes they made over 20 years ago that are still relevant to us here today. And these are lessons that we can take and apply to our digital transformations and ERP implementations here in the 2020s. So that was the number 10 most viewed video from our YouTube channel in 2024. That was lessons from Hershey's SAP failure. It just had just over 3,000 views, which brings us to number 9 in the first of our training videos. So what do we got here at number 9, Darian?
Yeah, number 9, like you said, first training video of many that you're going to see on this list. This one was Introduction to Business Process Management, the complete training course. So we're going to go ahead and play around 12 to 15 minutes of this.
So one of the things that we found during digital and business transformations is that business process improvement is one of the most critical components. In fact, most organizations are going through a digital transformation because they want to improve and optimize their business processes. But oftentimes with all the different work streams and activities that happen during a digital transformation, it can be very difficult to understand what exactly business process management is and how it ties into our other activities. So what I want to do today is talk about more of a deep dive understanding of what business process management is and how it can be deployed in your organization. Now, this training is broken into a few different sections. First of all, I'm going to start off with the basic fundamental understanding of business process management, business process mining, which is a really important emerging area within business process management. And then I'm going to shift gears and talk about process improvement and how to define that future state. And then later in the segment, we'll give some examples of actual business process mapping exercises as well. I've also included below chapter marking so you can skip ahead to different chapters that you like, so you can see the full outline of this training course. And you can jump ahead if you like, jump through the different sessions as we go through the different modules here today. First, it helps to dive into and understand and unpack what exactly business process management is. And to help us understand this, I've included a couple of our team members from the Third Stage Consulting team to help explain what business process management is in a fair amount of detail.
So let's just go ahead and jump right in and get started with this, Brian. First and foremost, what is business process management or process improvement?
Sure thing, Cameron. And, it's important to, people listening are going to have a variety of different degrees of exposure to this. So depending on where you're at in your journey of familiarity here, you may have heard a lot of different terms, whether it's Six Sigma or BPM, TQM, process reengineering, continuous improvement. There's a number of different methodologies and frameworks and tools out there. And they all have different areas of focus. They all have value. But for what we're going to get into today, I really want to focus more on the similarities and what they mean for your organization and not worry too much about the distinctions of what each of those techniques are. So really the guiding principle around this, what's critical is that how your organization gets work done, that is central to your mission and to what you're trying to do. So it's your processes that are what connect your people to your customers and to your organization's goals. So managing your processes, it's about understanding what your processes are, how they're getting done, how well they're getting done. It's about aligning them to your goals, making sure that they're serving your organization the way that they need to. It's about managing the effectiveness of these processes and ensuring that the effectiveness and the efficiency, I should say, ensuring that the way your people are getting work done is really serving what you need and that you have an eye into how that's happening. And it's about continuously monitoring and improving that. So to the extent possible, you want to be gathering data on your processes and being able to really see the health of your processes, how they're supporting what you're trying to do, and being able to focus on and improve the processes that need improvement.
Excellent. Thank you for that answer. Then one of the key words I just heard was continuous process improvement. So sounds like it's something that needs to continue. It should never just, we do it one time and we're done.
Absolutely, Cam. Yeah, your organization's always changing, and processes that served you well at one point in time may not serve you well in the future. And that could be for a variety of reasons. It could be because the business has changed. It could be because you've had turnover in your people. It could be because circumstances have changed around it. Processes, I don't want to conflate process and technology at all, but technology is in so much of what we do now strongly intermingled with your processes and is a key part of it. In some cases, technology is a key driver of them. In some cases, it's an add-ons. So technology, as it's changing, also has an impact on your processes. So for a variety of reasons, things are going to be different over time, and you can't just assume that because you got things set into a good place at one time that you're fixed for the future. That said, you may find that the degree of attention you're putting on different processes over time is different. Some may be able to go through an improvement effort and a minimal amount of monitoring to be kept successful. Others really need to be more closely watched over time. Obviously, it'd be great if you can put as much attention to all of your processes as you can over time, but just recognizing limitations and resources, you do need to have a good understanding of what are the processes you have out there, how important are they, which ones you're going to put your time and attention to and devote your resources to.
Excellent. Well, thank you for elaborating on that. And I think this would be a good time to switch gears here, and we'll maybe ask who should be involved in this business process management or process improvement.
Sure thing, Cam. So there are a variety of roles you want to get involved in this. And one of the key areas that I haven't brought up in this that's important here is the idea of cross-functional processes and looking at your processes end to end. So often you may have teams that do some work on their own processes. They may do brown bag sessions and map things out and say, this is what we need to improve, but they may not be optimizing for that end-to-end experience. So defining your processes in an end-to-end fashion is a key part of that. And so doing, it means that when you want to undertake process efforts, you need to be able to bring in these cross-functional teams who are involved in the end-to-end process. So you don't just want to have, say, an operations team without having the sales team that's connected to it. You need to make sure that you are closely linked. And it's not to say every single session involving every process needs to touch on everyone, but you need to make sure you're really looking at where are the handoffs and processes and how do you engage the people across them. So the types of roles you're going to have in this, you'll need to have subject matter experts who have familiarity in different key areas. And you need to make sure, too, that these are people who know on the ground what's happening. You may have very knowledgeable managers who have a good understanding of the big picture and what's happening, but it's often true that they're disconnected from the reality of day-to-day, what's happening in those processes. It's not to say they are by definition, but you need to be careful that you're not just assuming that someone who oversees the process actually knows how it's getting done. So in addition to those subject matter experts, you should have business process owners, people who are responsible for that end-to-end process. And a lot of organizations may have done exercises of defining and assigning business process owners, or they may not have. So that's really a key role where you need to make sure that there is a person who is accountable to the health of that process and who's going to be overseeing it over time. And the other piece you need to bring in, of course, is someone to facilitate sessions. So there are different roles that can do this, and depending on the type of effort you're getting in, you may look for people with a vast amount of experience in doing something like this, business process analysts, someone with, whether or not certifications can be a good thing. It's not just certifications that matter, and people can learn to do this. But this is a type of area where if you don't have people who have experience in this, you're going to need some help. That's an area where there's organizations like Third Stage that we can step in and help with something like this. And there are plenty of ways to get some outside help if you don't have that skill set within your organization.
Awesome, thank you. And thank you for distinguishing the difference between a business process owner and subject matter expert. I know that sometimes there's confusion during sessions that there's a mix-up. And so is there anything additional that we need to show to distinguish? Like the business process owner is more so responsible for that process, like they're going to sign it off. The subject matter expert, it could be a number of people working underneath them in different departments, like you said. Are there anything else that we can distinguish the difference between? When you have workshop sessions, are you bringing in the business process owners with all the subject matter experts? What's that kind of look like?
It's important that you need to understand your organization, what the roles people are doing and how they're going to contribute to a session like this. So, one of the key things you want to make sure, and I'll get around to directly answering this question, Cam, but just for some background on it, you want to make sure that the people you have involved are ones who are able to both understand the process and be able to think towards what the future state needs to be and look to build onto what are you trying to get to. They need to be able to make some degree of decisions in there, but your subject matter experts are the people who can really help drive things out and help you understand where you're at today and some direction on where you're going tomorrow. But it's the business process owners who really need to be accountable for making the decisions and being able to say, yes, this is absolutely what we want to do or not. And they're also responsible for setting direction. That comes from various directions roles within the organization who are going to help with that. So if you need to make sure you know, what are you trying to get out of this initiative? Are you trying to standardize your processes? Are you trying to bring together different locations onto something common? Are you trying to just aim for greater efficiency and have improvement in that way of, meeting certain metrics around whether it's quality or time to complete, customer satisfaction? Obviously, everything's got to be linked towards your customers' goals in the end, but making sure that you are really clear on what the direction is and what you're trying to get to. So ultimately, it's the business process owner who needs to be accountable for that within. So they have a key role for sure in the before any changes are implemented in your processes, that they're the ones who need to be comfortable that that's the direction you want to go. The subject matter experts are the ones who can really help identify a lot of those things on the ground that you need to do. So just to tie it back to where you were coming from in your question, it really depends on what your skill sets are of your subject matter experts and your BPO, your business process owner. Are they going to add value sitting through this time and working through the mapping with people and defining everything, or are they best positioned to do a review after the fact and help set some direction based on those things that are found? And your subject matter experts, are they capable without the guidance in the room or but just from the facilitator to be able to set some of that direction and pick the future state? Or are you going to end up having a session where your SMEs are coming up with a bunch of ideas, but then you bring them over to your process owners later and find that these things are based on taking things from where we are today and improving them, as opposed to, setting a new way of doing work that you want to get to. So you really need to have a clear understanding of where you're trying to get to and what your skill sets are of your people to be able to get there.
Excellent, thank you. And there was one thing you mentioned, it was initiatives, and I think this would be a good time to maybe link up process improvement to digital transformations. So what does that look like?
Absolutely. So, organizations, the term digital transformation, some may think of as a buzzword, and it can mean a lot of different things. It is to a degree, but it's a helpful umbrella in which to think about the impact of technology and what it has on our organizations and how you're trying to modernize and use technology to your advantage. And as I mentioned earlier, processes are not they're not your technology directly, but technology does have a big impact on things. So I like to I don't think of process as strictly it's driven by technology. It's your processes that really drive what your technology needs to be, and you need to align that, but the capabilities you get out of technology are important. So as you're looking into an effort where whatever kind of project you're doing or initiative you're undertaking that is connected to your business processes, those processes and your business or organizational goals are what you need to think about in terms of driving that forward. So if you're in the early stages of saying, for example, we want to get a new ERP system, we want to drive our organization forward and increase efficiencies in our supply chain, in our purchasing, in our manufacturing, in our finance, HR, whatever it is you're trying to improve there, you want to make sure that initiative and the technology you go with is aligned to where you want your processes to be. You don't just want to jump into, let's pick a technology and assume we're just going to latch on to whatever that technology has to offer, and our business will follow suit. That's a recipe for failure if you just assume the technology alone is going to make those changes. You may decide that you want to follow those, I hate to use this term, but it may apply here. There are some scenarios where just using best practice technology processes within a technology is the direction you want to go. But that needs to be a well thought out and considered decision where you're still understanding that some parts of your business may not fit into that. You need to understand, really put the time and effort into what it is you're trying to do and how is that going to drive the technology decision, and making sure that anything you're doing from a technology perspective is aligned around where does your business and your organization trying to go.
All right, so that was our number 9 highest ranked video of 2024. Eric, what do we got for number 8?
Yeah, number 8 is AI. You figure you can't have a top 10 list of any sort without mentioning AI in some capacity. And this is the first video here that had just under 5,000 views in 2024. And it's how artificial intelligence is making ERP systems and software implementations more effective. So in this video, we're really trying to bring together the best of the new world of AI and the best of the old world of ERP, and talk about how those two things are coming together and how AI is affecting ERP software and the implementations themselves. So this is the number 8 on our list of the top 10 YouTube videos of 2024, how AI is making ERP systems more effective. Now, the first way that AI is changing and improving ERP software as we know it is that it's allowing organizations to finally take advantage of all this data they've been accumulating for years and decades in many cases. If you think about organizations going back to the 60s, we're starting to automate their business processes, starting to automate their data capture, and certainly that trend accelerated in the 70s and 80s into the 90s. And I'd say starting since the 90s, most organizations were on some sort of electronic computer system starting to collect data. So you've got at least 30 to 40 years plus of organizational history that a lot of organizations have that have been around for a long time, but they haven't known what to do with this data. They've had dirty data, they've had trouble mapping it, migrating it to new systems as they've done upgrades. So that's been a problem in the past, but now with AI, if we can get our data right, it gives us a way to actually make use of that data. So instead of just having reams and reams of transactional data going back 30 years, now we can use AI to make more sense and more meaning of it. We can also use predictive analytics and machine learning and other aspects and subcomponents of AI to help us predict the future and understand what might happen based on some of our historic data. And it's not just our internal data that AI within ERP software is allowing us to take advantage of, it's also third-party sources of data. So if we can look at external macroeconomic indicators or weather patterns or other things that might affect our business, we can take those data sets and integrate it with our core internal data and then use AI models to help predict the future. So as more ERP software vendors continue to build up their AI capabilities, more of them are going to find ways to improve the way organizations are getting value from AI. I'd say the lowest hanging fruit for AI within ERP software systems and the deployments that go along with them, as we know it today, is going to be generative and conversational AI. And if you don't know what that is, it's essentially the component of AI that allows you to talk to the system or type a question within a system and have a conversation rather than having to go into a system, go to a specific report, or go to a specific set of transactions to find the data you're looking for. If any of you have tried or used ChatGPT, for example, that's an example of conversational AI. You can type within ChatGPT a question or ask it to analyze something and it's going to come back with a response. You don't have to go Google a bunch of results. You don't have to go into your ERP system to pull a bunch of data. And this is where a lot of ERP software vendors are starting. They're starting with these conversational AI models that sit on top of their ERP platform and the ERP database to allow you to interact with the system in a different way. So you don't have to memorize where you need to go, what screen you need to go to, what field you need to fill out. You can type in a set of questions or a description of what you're looking for, and that conversational AI interface will allow you to receive that information accordingly. So as we look to where we are right now in the maturity curve of AI within ERP software, conversational and generative AI is probably the furthest along, and that's where a lot of software vendors are providing some capabilities there. So look for this as a way to really automate and streamline and change the way employees use and interact with your systems in your data going forward. Now, in addition to generative and conversational AI, there's other creative uses of AI that are being used by ERP software vendors and some of the more innovative companies that are deploying ERP systems. One example is just being able to analyze data in unique ways. So if we've always had a report that was run a certain way or showed a certain set of data, not only can we now just conversationally ask the AI interface for that same information without having to go create a report manually, now we could ask it to go a step further and create a graph that compares different subsets of data or create a visual representation in a way that we haven't done before. So it really allows us and allows employees within our organizations to think outside the box of how we could be using these ERP systems and the data within them to capture information and analyze information and create outputs in different ways than we ever have. And this is where it becomes really important to not just deploy AI and assume that people are going to figure out how to do that. This is where, when we define our future state, we need to be creative about figuring out how are we going to use the AI capabilities either within our ERP system or a third-party AI solution that allows us to provide that information and those capabilities to our employees. So in other words, we can't assume that our employees are just going to figure out and come to the right answer by accident. We have to paint a vision for them of how they might use AI to get information faster and to be more creative in how they deploy and use AI within their ERP systems.
Now, it's important to recognize that as we're talking about ERP software and AI, it's not just the AI capabilities that are being built within the ERP systems themselves that you have as an option. You also have the option of a standalone AI solution. And there's a lot of AI vendors out there, a lot of upstarts and startups that are creating AI solutions that can be bolted onto or worked within a certain technical landscape. For example, you have AI solutions that are allowing you to access data from multiple systems, and it's allowing you to analyze that data, create outputs, and create some of the analyses and predictive analytics and some of the forecasting that AI affords, but it's not necessarily something you have to rely on the ERP software vendor to provide. You can also go find third-party AI providers that can provide some of those capabilities, especially if you're working with a software vendor that's still building those capabilities. It doesn't quite have the AI maturity as a standalone AI solution. So when you're evaluating ERP systems, it may be worth not only looking at the AI capabilities of whatever system you're looking at, but also look at the third-party AI solutions that might work with that ERP system, as well as other legacy systems that you are going to retain for a short period or perhaps even permanently on top of any new ERP system you might deploy. So be sure to consider your full options when you're deploying ERP software in terms of how you might use AI. Now, what's really interesting about AI and ERP software is that it sort of triangulates itself or comes together with another trend in the market, which is the movement to the cloud. ERP software vendors are, for the most part, en masse moving to the cloud. They've transitioned their on-premise legacy systems or are in the process of transitioning those systems to cloud solutions that are largely rewrites of that legacy software. And the beauty here, in addition to other benefits of deploying cloud technology, is it really enables AI in a way that we haven't seen before. So if you think about your old legacy systems and some of the security issues you might have had and some of the silos of data, the lack of interconnectivity that you might have had, the dirty data, it didn't really lend itself well to really capitalize on AI in the way we can today. Fast forward to cloud solutions now, you've got a standard data model, standard business processes, less likelihood of corrupting the data because now you have standard processes to manage that data, and you've got all your data now presumably in one place in the cloud. And that's where AI really shines, because now AI can be used and rely upon more reliable data to help fuel the models and help provide information and help provide value that AI can afford. The other component that's really interesting is as we look to third-party data sources, especially as we look at things like Internet of Things and wearables and other devices that are capturing data outside of our four walls of our organization. Now with cloud computing, we can capture that data and integrate that data with our internal data to further enable those AI models. So there's a lot happening in the cloud space that is really accelerating the trend towards AI, and it's really a sort of a perfect storm or a perfect backdrop for AI to really take off and to continue to gain adoption and mainstream use within the ERP software space, which is largely why the ERP software vendors are investing so heavily in AI right now.
All right, that was the number 8 video of 2024 in our top 10 list here with just under 5,000 views, how AI is making ERP systems more effective. And we've still got a lot more to cover. We've got the top 7 to get to here in just a moment. We're going to get to that in just a moment. But first, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you'll want to download the Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how you can take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S/4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 203. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Chwialkowski. This is the podcast that has everything to do with digital transformation. It's the independent and tech-agnostic view of digital transformation, including the people, process, technology, and strategy sides of change. We're here counting down the top 10 videos of 2024 based on you, the viewers, and the videos that you watch the most from my YouTube channel. And we're up to number 7. What have we got here, Darian?
Yeah, this one's a fun one. We have a comparison of ERP systems. So this one was just under 6,000 views, and it's a comparison between SAP S/4HANA and Oracle Cloud Fusion. So let's go into the comparison.
Now, these are the two most common ERP systems in the marketplace, not just in general, but also for larger organizations. Organizations that are in the upper mid-market as well as large enterprises and Fortune 1000 organizations are more likely to evaluate these two options, perhaps just those two, or perhaps among other systems that they're comparing to as well. Both systems have been around now for several years, and their predecessor legacy systems have been around for decades. SAP and Oracle have dominated this space for quite some time. So it's interesting to look at how these products have evolved over time, how the strategies of the two vendors have evolved, and how the two systems compare to one another. The good news in the evaluation between SAP and Oracle is that the two systems, S/4HANA and Fusion, can't be much different. There's a lot of commonalities between them, but there's a lot of differences between the two systems. And I really want to highlight and focus on those differences here today to help you determine which one might be a better fit and which one might be a better choice to go do a deeper dive to understand the capabilities as it relates to your business requirements and needs. Now, both of these systems are highly scalable. They're systems that are built for large organizations. They have complex and diverse functionality that fits the needs of larger, diversified organizations. And both systems, as I mentioned before, are very well established, so there's a certain amount of maturity that both systems have. And finally, both systems have a huge plethora of modules and or bolt-on systems that can address diverse needs of different industries and different organizations. So there's a lot of commonalities in the two systems, but I'm going to focus today on the differences. Now, for a deeper dive comparison of these two systems, as well as how other systems compare to these two systems, I encourage you to read our 2024 Digital Enterprise Operations Report. And that report that we publish each year covers a number of implementation tips and lessons to help you through your digital transformation, but it also provides a number of benchmarks, as well as independent and tech-agnostic software comparisons and rankings to help you see how these different systems compare to one another. So I encourage you to read that. You can read it by scanning the QR code in front of you, or you can go to the links below. So let's jump into the comparison of these two products. One of the big differences between S/4HANA and Oracle Fusion is the level of standardization versus flexibility. Now, both systems are standardized to some degree, and they're both flexible to some degree, but they're different more so than they are similar in this way. What I mean by that is, let's start with SAP S/4HANA. S/4HANA is generally viewed as a more rigid, more standardized way of conducting business processes, for better or for worse. And if you're an organization that's trying to scale through efficiencies and economies of scale and consistency throughout your operations, S4HANA could have a slight upper edge over Oracle Fusion in that way. However, if you're a decentralized and flexible organization that values flexibility, Oracle Fusion might be a better fit. And the reason for that is that Oracle does have a certain amount of standardization, but it also tends to have a more flexible tool set that allows you to configure and customize the software more easily than if you were to implement S4HANA. Now, don't get me wrong, customization has a dark side as well, of course. So it may be that you don't want to customize or you want to minimize customization, but you can accomplish that through project governance and controls and still get the benefit of some limited flexibility where you need it. So there's other ways to mitigate the risk rather than necessarily having to deploy a more standard or more rigid system like S4HANA. So one of the key things that you can ask yourselves as an organization is, which is more important to us? Do we want that common standardization across the entire enterprise, or do we really like the option of having a certain amount of flexibility in the way we deploy technology throughout the enterprise? And that might guide you or lead you towards one versus the other. It also helps to look at the integration and architecture of the technology itself. And let's start with SAP S4HANA again. S4HANA was built on the S4 platform, which is essentially a database and an operating system on top of that database that is real time. So without getting into the technical nuances and details, S4 is a database and platform that allows real-time data processing without consuming a huge amount of memory within the system. So it allows faster processing of data and a smaller footprint in terms of processing and the consumption of that data. So the S4 platform is new to SAP, in particular the S4HANA platform, and legacy versions of SAP like ECC and R3 did not use that S4 platform. So that's a key differentiator in a new development in the S4HANA world. So Oracle is built on its own database. Oracle is a database company to begin with, and Fusion is built on that database. But what's unique about Oracle that's a little bit different than SAP is that Oracle has historically been very strong in enterprise performance management, business intelligence, and overall data analytics. So anything to do with data, Oracle's very strong in, and that's also true for Oracle Fusion. And so I'd say both are very strong in the area of database and data analysis. However, I'd give the slight edge to Oracle in that they have acquired some systems over the years that they've now integrated into Oracle Fusion that have allowed them to be stronger in this area. For example, Hyperion was a system that they acquired over a decade ago, maybe 20 years ago, and that's a capability that they've baked into Oracle Fusion as well. What's really interesting about S4HANA and Oracle Fusion is a way that these two companies have sort of flipped positions in their strategies and how they have developed and gone to market with their product suite. In other words, both vendors are not necessarily going to market with just one solution, even though we're just talking about one solution from each vendor. They have a multitude of systems that help support that core solution. And this is particularly true for SAP. S4HANA is a great product that has a lot of capabilities, but it can't do everything that organizations need. So SAP has gone out and acquired other systems, other best-of-breed systems that they integrate into S4HANA to complete the full picture of what a customer might need. For example, SAP has acquired business objects, they've acquired Concur, they've acquired SuccessFactors, and other systems to help fill the void with human capital management and business intelligence, Ariba on the procurement side of things, and a number of different systems. And what's really interesting about this is that SAP has now become somewhat of a best-of-breed provider, which is what Oracle used to be. Oracle was the one that back in the 90s and early 2000s was out acquiring other software vendors. They acquired JD Edwards and PeopleSoft and Siebel and other systems. And for a long time, they went to market with multiple systems to give customers multiple options depending on what their needs were. So it's sort of flipped now because Oracle Fusion is the first time that Oracle's really gone to market with a single platform for the most part, and they're really focusing on building more that greenfield strategy of baking all the capabilities into a single platform, which was what SAP used to do. So if you look at the evolution of these two companies over the last 10 or 20 years, it's very interesting to see their product strategy and their suite of products evolve and change over time. So what this means to you as an organization is that if you deploy S4HANA, you have to realize and recognize that you're probably going to have to deploy other systems on top of that. If you go with Oracle Fusion, you're probably going to be more primarily focused on Fusion rather than a best-of-breed suite of products, for better or for worse. So it depends on what the needs are of the organization, but just be aware that it's not just one system we're talking about in both cases. Now, SAP and Oracle have two unique go-to-market strategies. I'm going to talk about SAP first. SAP has something called Rise and Grow. These are two ways they've gone to market to address different parts of the market. Let's start with SAP Rise. Rise is SAP's way of going to market to convince its install base to migrate to S/4HANA. So customers that are using ECC or R3, for example, they're trying to convince that here's a roadmap to help them get there, and here's a process and a set of solutions that will help them evolve and migrate to S/4HANA. It's based on a number of industry best practices and technologies that are meant to be easier to deploy, but it still is difficult because you're going through a massive re-implementation of new software, but it's something that they've brought to market as a way to make it easier for customers to migrate to S/4HANA. There's also SAP Grow, and Grow is what SAP is doing to go to market to attack the mid-market. So S/4HANA, as I mentioned before, is typically used by larger enterprises, but now with SAP Grow, they're trying to scale it down for small to mid-sized organizations that could still leverage SAP S/4HANA, primarily the multi-tenant cloud version of S/4HANA, and also provide a number of best practices and other accelerators that will help small to mid-sized companies implement S/4HANA easier and faster than a bigger company might. So these are two important go-to-market strategies that might influence your decision as you evaluate these two solutions, and it's something worth considering as you evaluate SAP S/4HANA. So far, we've focused on Oracle Fusion, which is Oracle's answer to the upper mid-market and larger enterprises. However, Oracle has also acquired NetSuite. NetSuite is a SaaS-based cloud solution that Larry Ellison was actually involved in starting, and then he ultimately acquired that company almost 10 years ago now. And the reason I bring this up in this video is because when you're evaluating Oracle Fusion, a question may come up of whether or not you should be looking at Fusion or whether you should be looking at NetSuite. And if you're in the mid-market especially, it may be that you're sort of in a gray area where you could be evaluating Fusion for more robust capabilities, but it might cost you more and be riskier, or you might look a little bit down market at Oracle NetSuite. So just as SAP is pursuing the mid-market with SAP Grow, as I mentioned a minute ago, Oracle is also pursuing the mid-market with its acquisition of NetSuite. And NetSuite is being very aggressive in moving upstream, further up the mid-market. And what you're seeing is that there's a lot of competition now between Oracle NetSuite and Oracle Fusion, and ultimately you have to make an objective decision on which one is right for you, especially if you're in the mid-market. If you're a larger organization, you're probably going to go with Fusion. If you're a smaller organization, you're probably going to go with the NetSuite evaluation, but it's that mid-market where a lot of organizations find that they could be going either way. So when you're evaluating Oracle Fusion, you may want to consider NetSuite as well if you're in the middle market. Another thing to consider is change management and adoption. And this is where I'll say that it's probably more of a net neutral overall between the two vendors. And what I mean by change management and adoption is that how easy is it for end users to use these two technologies? First of all, I'll say that if you're a legacy SAP or Oracle customer, you're using a legacy product from one of these two vendors, chances are pretty high that it's going to be a little bit easier for your organization to adapt to the newer version from that same vendor. So if you're using SAP ECC, it's probably going to be a little bit easier for your organization to adapt to S/4HANA. If you're using Oracle EBS or any of the other past legacy Oracle systems, it might be a little bit easier to move to Oracle Fusion. However, it's not going to be easy. These are complete re-implementations. So even if you're using a legacy product, you are re-implementing a brand new product that's rewritten for the cloud and has completely different capabilities, completely different levels of maturity, and that's really important and worth noting. Now, I will say when it comes to the maturity of these two solutions and the way they've migrated to the cloud, I'll say that Oracle Fusion has a leg up. They are a more mature product, I'd say, largely because Fusion has been in development for a long time, for I think 12 or 15 years. S/4HANA is a little bit newer to market, so there's still some development that they're doing to catch up to what some of the legacy products could do. So you really have to look at the functional fit of these two systems, compare it to what your needs are, and ultimately that will help you determine which one is going to be easier for your organization to adapt to from an organizational change perspective.
All right, so that was the SAP S/4HANA and Oracle Fusion Cloud ERP system comparison. Like I said, just under 6,000 views. Great video there. Eric, what do we have for number 6?
Well, that was a vendor-specific video comparing two leading systems in the market. And at number 6 is another vendor-specific video. And being tech agnostic, we publish stuff about all types of vendors, but these are the ones that sort of rose to the top of the list. But this one, we talked about SAP and Oracle in the last clip in the comparison of the two. This one is actually a deep dive training, another one of those training courses that's a longer form video where we compile a bunch of content all related to D365 implementations. And this one had about 7,000 views, just under 7,000 views in 2024. It's Microsoft D365 training, a detailed introduction to D365 and implementations. So with that, we'll roll you a sample of that clip from the longer video, which you can find. We'll include the links to these longer form videos that we're not playing the whole thing of. We'll include those in the description below. But in the meantime, we'll play this little clip here from number 6, which is the Microsoft D365 training course.
A lot of our clients are implementing Microsoft D365, and we're helping them through their journeys to D365. And I want to go through a training program to help you be prepared for your D365 implementation, to really learn all it is you need to know about Microsoft D365. Now, today's training is broken up into a couple of different segments. We're going to go through a lot of different modules here today, so I won't cover each individual one here with you today, but you can go to the description field below if you want to jump ahead to different chapters or at least see what the different modules are within this training. But in general, what we're going to do is we're going to start off by talking about what D365 is, some of the strengths and weaknesses, how it compares to other systems in the marketplace, and then we'll shift gears and talk about how to prepare for an implementation and actually execute an implementation. And then finally, last but not least, we'll talk about some lessons learned from D365 implementations. Now, if you're looking for more supplementary information to give you a deeper understanding of Microsoft D365 and what it is you need to know to make a D365 implementation successful, I encourage you to read our Guide to Successful Dynamics 365 Implementations. This is chock full of tons of information and tons of lessons and tips for how to make your D365 implementation successful. You can read that paper for free by scanning the QR code right here in front of you, or you can go to the description field below and find the link to the Guide to D365. And just as a side note, one last thing before we jump in, this training is designed for anyone that's involved with the D365 implementation, including Finance and Operations or F&O and Business Central. So whichever version of Dynamics 365 that you're implementing, this training is meant to help you through that process. To start, let's give a brief overview of what Microsoft D365 is. This is meant to help provide a foundation and a simple, basic understanding of the software so that we can build on this and then talk more specifically about the strengths and weaknesses of the product and how it compares to other systems and how we might ultimately deploy it. So here's a quick overview of what Microsoft D365 really is. And many of our clients implement Microsoft Dynamics 365. It's one of the most common ERP systems in the marketplace. It's owned by Microsoft, which is obviously a very well-known company. And it's one of the top 3 software vendors in terms of market share, especially for small and mid-sized companies. So what I want to do today is talk about what is Dynamics 365, is it a good fit for you, and where is it the best fit for organizations? So to fully understand what D365 is, it helps to look at the history of Microsoft Dynamics and Dynamics 365. So about 20 years ago, when Microsoft started really pushing into the business technology and enterprise software space, they went out and they acquired a few different companies. Companies like Navision, Great Plains, Exapta. Those were all standalone ERP systems that were acquired and eventually rolled into the umbrella of Microsoft Dynamics. And for several years, Microsoft allowed these 3 systems to coexist under the Microsoft Dynamics umbrella, under their original brand names of Great Plains, Exapta, Navision. And eventually, they came out with their current flagship offering, which is Microsoft Dynamics 365. And essentially what they've done here is they've combined the best of those acquisitions and those legacy solutions to create a more common system that stands alone as Dynamics 365. It's also a solution that has been built in the cloud, and so it's meant for cloud deployments. It was one of the early adopters of cloud deployments. And Dynamics 365 has 2 different primary products, or sub-products, if you will. One is called Business Central, Dynamics 365 Business Central, and that is the solution for smaller and mid-market companies. It's the more vanilla solution for simpler organizations, those that aren't looking for a big, heavy ERP implementation, and ones that are looking for a lower cost option. Business Central can be a good fit in those cases. In other cases, they also provide D365 Finance and Operations, which Finance and Operations is sort of the bigger ERP solution that's meant to compete with SAP and Oracle and some of the other larger ERP vendors. So typically multinational companies and larger, more complex organizations will deploy the finance and operations version of Microsoft D365, while the smaller counterparts will typically implement Business Central. I recently published a video that provides a more in-depth review of Dynamics 365. What I'd like to do here today is summarize some of the strengths and weaknesses of the product. Starting with the strengths, one of the biggest strengths of the product is that it's flexible. When you compare it to other systems in the marketplace, it's generally going to be more flexible. It's something that can be configured in a number of different ways, and it can also be customized in a number of different ways as well, which could be a good or a bad thing. So that sort of flexibility is one of the big advantages of D365, as is its open architecture. The Dynamics platform was originally built on the .NET platform, which is a very open architecture that's meant to integrate third-party systems, and it's a way to tie together multiple systems into the platform. So if you're a company that has multiple legacy systems and you're looking for flexibility in integration to other systems, D365 can be a great fit. A couple of the disadvantages of the product, however, are that, first of all, the flexibility itself can be both a strength and a weakness. And what I mean by that is the flexibility of the product can also become overwhelming to organizations and project teams. It can be very difficult to decide how you want to configure the software because you have so many options. And many organizations and project teams get tangled up in all the options that they have in deploying the solution. The same goes for the ease of customization and the ability to customize. The fact that you can customize the solution and you can be flexible in the way you deploy it doesn't necessarily mean that you should. And so what we find with D365 implementations oftentimes is that the flexibility ends up becoming a cover or a cover-up for all the change management issues that your organization may have in its ability to change. And the final weakness of the product is that it is a product that isn't as robust as some may need in certain industries or in certain diverse operations. So for example, if you're an organization that has very complex manufacturing needs, there's probably better products out there that can handle some of your manufacturing needs. Same for warehouse management. If you're a high volume, complex distribution company, it may be tested or stressed by the needs that you have as an organization. So when evaluating D365, you really want to make sure you pressure test some of those outlying capabilities and the outlying business processes, especially as it relates to your secret sauce or your competitive advantage related business processes. When evaluating Microsoft Dynamics 365, it's helpful to understand the ecosystem of Microsoft. And what I mean by ecosystem is the supporting organizations and the supporting environment that allows you to use third parties to deploy the software. So Microsoft generally doesn't sell their software directly to consumers or end organizations. What they generally do is rely on third-party VARs or value-added resellers. These are organizations that are third-party partners of Microsoft, and their intent and focus is to implement Microsoft D365. Now, this is a good thing because it gives organizations a lot of different options, a lot of different resources in the marketplace that can help you deploy the product. The downside is that there's so many different options in the marketplace that there's a lot of variation in the capabilities of the different VARs and resellers that are out there. So you really want to vet those resellers carefully and make sure that you're navigating the sort of fragmented ecosystem carefully. Now, the other dimension that is both a strength and a weakness of the Microsoft ecosystem is they have what's called ISVs, or independent software vendors. And these, again, are third-party organizations that not only implement Microsoft D365, but in most cases, they've also built some sort of unique capability on top of D365. So you might have an industry-specific solution that takes the D365 platform and tailors it for a specific industry, and that IP or that intellectual property is only offered by that one ISV. So again, it's a pro and a con, because in one hand, it allows you to find a very specific version of Dynamics 365, but on the flip side, it's also exposing you to a third party that may or may not be a good fit for your organization, and it creates just yet another option that you have to choose from. The other thing that this calls into question is that with ISVs, they're the only ones that can support that version of the software. So you've somewhat limited your options in terms of who can support that specific version of Dynamics 365. So in general, if you're looking for something that's both has the capability of a broad, big ERP system, but is also tailored for your industry or your specific needs, then Microsoft D365 can be a great fit for you. Now, the Dynamics 365 product rates fairly high in terms of its general functionality and capabilities. It can provide a very broad set of capabilities and business processes and workflows to help automate your business. But implementing the solution is a different story. Sometimes implementing can be very difficult. It can be challenging. I've mentioned the fact that the flexibility of the product can actually create problems during implementation if you don't have strong project governance and you don't have a strong vision of what you want of the product. So that's one thing to watch for, is the flexibility of the product is mostly a strength, but it can create risks and challenges during implementation. The other challenge of Microsoft Dynamics 365 implementations is that, as I mentioned before, the flexibility of the product can actually mask some of the change management issues that you may be facing within your organization. So in other words, just because you can change the software to do what you want it to do or the way you might operate today doesn't mean that you should. So what ends up happening oftentimes is we see clients who are resisting change, who want to keep doing things the way they always have, but use a new software to do it, and they end up changing the software just to automate the way they've always done things. So that's a dynamic you really want to watch for, and Dynamics 365 implementations tend to require even more change management support than other ERP systems. And finally, another challenge with D365 implementations is that because of the flexibility and the architecture, the open integration, all the advantages on the technical side, it ends up creating a myopic focus on the technology. You end up focusing resources on the technology pieces of the transformation rather than the more important operational and organizational pieces. So that's a pitfall you want to watch for, is don't let the flexibility and the complexity of the product suck you into a focus strictly on the technology, because ultimately it's the people and process side of the equation that will ultimately make you successful. So these are a few of the things to think about as you consider a Dynamics 365 implementation.
That was the number 6 most popular video, according to you, the viewers, with just under 7,000 views in 2024. That was the Microsoft D365 training course. That was just a snippet or a sample of what's in that full 2-hour course. You can watch that full video if you're interested in that topic. You want to go into that deep dive in more detail. We've included links below. You can find that on the YouTube channel, but go into the links in the description field below. So that brings us to number 5. What's at number 5, Darian?
Yeah, number 5, like you said, we do lots of videos on comparisons or specific training. But every single year, we also come out with the top ERP systems. So this was our top ERP systems for 2025 video. Let's roll the clip.
We've changed the way we've ranked the top 10 systems to focus not only on quantitative factors like average cost, functionality, things of that nature, but we also look at intangibles, things such as implementation time frame, risk, and just overall implementation success, the ecosystem supporting each of these products. And then thirdly, the other big change is that we've also looked outside the realm of our own experience and our own research, and we've drawn from other data sources and consolidated them and provided a sort of weighted ranking based on both third stage knowledge and experience, as well as other independent sources that combine to create this top 10 list. So what I want to do today is jump into what are those top 10 systems, what are the big changes from last year, and what are the top systems you should be considering as you look to your digital transformation in 2025 and beyond. Coming in at number 10 is Odoo. And Odoo was in our top 10 list last year. It dropped a little bit this year, but still a strong contender in the top 10. And it's a great solution for smaller organizations that are looking for an ERP system to replace QuickBooks or maybe other manual processes. Now, some of the strengths of Odoo include the fact that it's relatively easy to deploy, it's relatively cost effective, and it's very modular. So it's great for organizations that don't necessarily know if they want a full-blown ERP system yet, and perhaps they just want to roll out individual modules. There's also a very strong developer community supporting Odoo, especially in certain parts of the world like Europe and Asia, and emerging as such in a similar way in other parts of the world as well. So very strong community and ecosystem supporting Odoo, and it continues to increase over time. Now, the downsides of Odoo include the fact that it is sometimes lacking scalability for larger organizations or upper mid-market organizations. They may find that Odoo just doesn't have quite the breadth of capability that some of the other larger systems in our top 10 list might have. And the other factor to consider is the fact that the configuration can take a while to set up. So for organizations that are looking to the open source model as a strength, they may also find that the weakness is now there's a lot of configuration work that needs to be done to get the system to work. But having said all that, Odoo is a strong product. It's got a passionate user community, a passionate ecosystem behind it. It's a good product. It continues to evolve over time. And that's why it comes in at number 10 on our list. Coming in at number 9 is Acumatica. And Acumatica is actually a new entrant in our top 10 list. It has not made our top 10 list before, but this year it does, largely because it has such an emerging market share in the small and mid-market. Much like Odoo and NetSuite and some of the other products that are focused on small and mid-market companies, Acumatica provides capabilities that can be very flexible and right-sized to fit a small and mid-sized organization. Some of the strengths of Acumatica include the fact that it's a cloud-native solution. So while a lot of its counterparts are still trying to move from on-premise systems to the cloud, Acumatica was built in the cloud, so it's got a little bit more maturity as it relates to cloud technology. It's also flexible, a lot more flexible than some of the other systems in the market. It can be cost-effective and affordable for small and mid-market companies, and it also provides a great deal of flexibility and integration to other systems. Now, some of the downside risks of Acumatica include the fact that it's not quite as scalable as some of the other systems in our top 10 list. So for organizations that are high growth or larger organizations, they may find that it doesn't have the advanced capabilities that are required. And also the ecosystem supporting Acumatica isn't as strong as some of the other systems in the marketplace. Yes, there are Acumatica resources out there and resellers that can support the product, but it's not as robust as some of the other systems in the marketplace. So it's important to recognize these weaknesses, but with all that being said, that's enough to land Acumatica at number 9 on our top 10 list. Coming in at number 8 is IFS. And IFS is an interesting solution because it's a larger scale ERP system that is not trying to be everything to everyone. So it has a lot of breadth of capability and a lot of depth within certain areas, but it's not a great fit for every industry and every organization out there. For example, IFS is very strong in asset-intensive types of organizations. So companies that have assets that need maintenance, repair, and that sort of thing, or you're trying to manage projects related to capital investments, those are some of the strengths that IFS focuses on. So that's why we see IFS so commonly used in companies like aerospace and defense organizations, energy and utilities, and even construction. Those asset-intensive organizations that really require different capabilities than what a more vanilla ERP system might provide. The product also has a relatively strong interface and an intuitive user interface, so it's a little bit easier to use and feels a little bit more modern than some of the other systems in our top 10 list. And it also has flexible deployment options. So IFS is one of the few companies that allow you to choose whether you want to deploy technology in the cloud or whether you want to use on-premise or whether you want to do some sort of hybrid. So it can be a great solution for organizations that sort of fit the profile, but it's not going to be a system that's going to work for every organization out there. But having said that, that's enough to land IFS at number 8 on our list. Coming in at number 7 is a combined offering from Workday and Salesforce. And this is an interesting entrant into our top 10 because in the past we've placed both Workday and Salesforce separately in our top 10 list. And quite frankly, we've received some criticism for that because a lot of people would say, well, Workday and Salesforce are not full-blown ERP systems. But just recently, Workday and Salesforce announced a partnership where they're going to market to provide more of a complete solution that takes advantage of Workday's human capital and financial capabilities, along with Salesforce's CRM capabilities, and also Salesforce's Force platform capabilities, so third-party developers that are building applications within that platform. Now, the beauty of this combined partnership is that now you're getting the R&D and the innovation of two different companies coming together to provide two solutions that can provide a complete ERP solution. Both Workday and Salesforce are also cloud-native solutions, SaaS-based cloud-native solutions, so they are more mature in the cloud space than a lot of other ERP systems in our study. And there's a lot of flexibility and power in the way that these two systems can be customized and integrated to provide a complete ERP solution. Now, the downside of these two solutions is that you're dealing with multiple solutions. So that sort of defeats the purpose of why organizations oftentimes look to ERP systems, is because they want one core ERP system that can do everything they need it to do. Here, we're talking about multiple systems, at the very least Salesforce and Workday, and maybe even other third-party apps built on the Force platform if that's something that your organization might need. So that complexity can be difficult. It can add complexity in terms of integration and testing and overall cost and risk. So those are some downsides that need to be considered. But with that all being said, this is enough to land Salesforce and Workday at number 7 on our list. Coming in at number 6 is Epicor Kinetic. And Epicor was in our top 10 last year and it's moved up a couple slots here this year. And the reason Epicor Kinetic is at number 6 and moving up is because it is so strong in the manufacturing and distribution space. So if you're in a manufacturing and distribution related organization, you might find that Epicor is particularly strong, especially if you're a mid-market organization, and especially if you're looking for flexible deployment options using either cloud, on-premise, or a combination of both. Now, Epicor Kinetic is strong in that it focuses on manufacturing and distribution and some of the needs of those organizations. So a lot of mid-sized organizations find that it's a great functional fit without having to pay the higher cost of a tier 1 or a larger ERP system that might be overkill for what their needs are. And when we compare Epicor to other software providers in the marketplace, we find that they're investing particularly heavy in user interface, and it has a modern day look and feel of a modern ERP system. And those are some of the strengths of the solution. And then another intangible factor that we look at is the fact that they've got a very strong leadership that's really sort of turned the ship of Epicor and really helped put them on a stronger trajectory longer term. Now, some of the downsides of Epicor Kinetic include a few things. One is that if you're a large organization, you might find that there's not enough breadth of capability. Even if you're a manufacturer, you might find that you need a bigger system that can do more things. But if you're a mid-market organization, that might be enough. If you're a smaller manufacturer distribution company, you might actually find that Epicor is a bit expensive or a bit complex for your needs. So that's where you might look to other solutions that are even smaller than Epicor, but Epicor does fit nicely right there in the mid-market. And then another downside to consider is that compared to other systems in our top 10, Epicor does not have as strong of an ecosystem. It's a developing ecosystem and it's getting better. The new leadership team has invested more in its ecosystem and its network of partners, but it's still something that hasn't quite reached the levels of other systems in our top 10 list. But having said all this, that's enough to land Epicor number 6 on our list. Coming in at number 5 is Oracle NetSuite. And Oracle NetSuite is a great product that we see often, especially in the small and mid-market. Now, one thing to note with our new methodology is that NetSuite didn't rank as high this year, not because the product has become more inferior or because it's not as good of a product, but because the way we changed our methodology to focus on some of the multiple data sources and the breadth of capabilities and the weighting we put on breadth of capabilities tended to favor some of the larger software providers out there. But having said that, there's a number of strengths that keep NetSuite in the top 5. And for a smaller mid-market organization, you might actually rank NetSuite much higher than I've rated them here in this top 10. For example, NetSuite is a native SaaS cloud solution. In fact, it really pioneered the cloud ERP solution as we know it today. They're light years ahead of most of their competition in terms of building capabilities in the cloud. And they're investing very heavily in AI and analytics and some of these other emerging technologies that are so important. So they're making really modern technologies available to mass, small, and mid-market organizations. NetSuite is also known for its relative ease of implementation. It's suited for smaller and mid-market companies that don't have huge budgets or huge amounts of time to implement their solutions. But having said that, there's a couple of downside risks as well. Getting back to the ease of implementation, oftentimes small and mid-market companies have unrealistic expectations and expect the implementation to be a lot easier than it is. And we see a lot of organizations struggle with NetSuite's implementation methodology, which is called Suite Success, and it sort of creates these false expectations that the product can be implemented at a breakneck speed, and it doesn't account for some of the fact that organizations just have trouble adapting to change. It's not so much whether or not NetSuite can be deployed quickly, but whether or not the business can adapt to NetSuite quickly. And that's really where the rub is and where a lot of companies we work with tend to get tripped up. Another downside risk of NetSuite is given that it's a native SaaS solution, that inherently comes with some standardization and some standard business processes, but it also means there's a bit less flexibility than you might have in a fully customizable solution. And then finally, the last thing I'll say about a potential downside of NetSuite is that if you're a larger organization, you're growing quickly and you're looking to really scale and diversify your business, NetSuite may not be the best solution simply because it doesn't have quite the breadth of capabilities and it's harder to change the technology in some ways when you compare it to other systems in the marketplace. But having said all that, that's enough to land NetSuite at number 5 on our list. Coming in number 4 on our list is Infor Cloud Suite. Infor Cloud Suite has been in our top 10 for a few years in a row now, hovering in the top 5 here. And again, this year it continues. And I'd say some of the strengths of Infor Cloud Suite include the fact that it's a good alternative to the big tier 1 providers. So when you look at SAP, Oracle, maybe even Microsoft, Infor Cloud Suite is a great alternative in that it's not quite as big and massive and complex as some of these other systems. It's a little bit more focused, but yet still scalable for organizations that find that it's a good fit. And the organizations that find it to be a good fit are typically in the manufacturing space, the distribution space, or even the healthcare space, given some of their acquisitions in the healthcare market. So the product is relatively flexible. There's a fairly strong ecosystem supporting the product, and it can be cost effective when you compare it to some of the larger ERP software counterparts. Now, the downside risk of Infor Cloud Suite is a few things. One is that from a product perspective, Infor is still trying to figure out how to tie together and integrate all these different acquisitions they've made over the years. They've bought Lawson and Bond and some other ERP systems over the years, and they're still trying to figure out how to move everything towards this Cloud Suite umbrella. And as a result, when our customers buy and implement Cloud Suite, they're usually not implementing one solution. It's usually multiple solutions within the Infor suite of products that create a sort of best-of-breed approach that requires some complexity, integration, and potential cost and risk that goes along with that. So that's something to consider. And one other thing I'll mention is that if you're outside the realm of manufacturing, distribution, and healthcare, it may not be a great fit for you. You may find that there's other solutions out there that can provide more capabilities, or if you're a highly diversified organization, you may find that one of the bigger tier 1 systems might be a best fit. But with all that being said, that's enough to land Infor Cloud Suite at number 4 on our list. Coming in at number 3 is SAP S/4HANA. It's the system in the marketplace that has the largest market share, and especially amongst large Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 global organizations, S/4HANA is very common. Now, some of the strengths of the product include its massive breadth and functionality. There's just a lot of things the system can do. It's great for large multinational organizations with diverse needs that want to have a fully integrated solution to provide that global visibility into the business operations. It's got a strong ecosystem behind it, a lot of different partners and system integrators out there that support SAP, a lot of resources available to support SAP. And SAP just provides a complete solution that caters to a number of different industries. Now, the downside risk of S/4HANA are a few things. One is that oftentimes SAP is trying to be everything to everyone, and in its quest to do so, there's not a perfect fit within any one industry. Certainly they're stronger in some industries, but there's some industries where S/4HANA is overkill or it doesn't quite meet the needs of that specific industry or that type of organization. S/4HANA implementations are complex, they're risky, they're costly. Even for legacy SAP customers that are using ECC, they find that it's a big jump to S/4HANA, and there's a lot of complexities that go along with that, given that it's a new architecture, a new platform, and a completely new system built for the cloud. And when we look at implementations, implementation challenges are one thing holding back S/4HANA in our top 10 list. There's a lot of challenges out there, a lot of struggling and troubled S/4HANA implementations that we're seeing in the market, so that's something that holds it back. And then finally, the last thing I'll say is that when you look at the user interface of SAP, it's not quite as modern and clean, and it's not quite as user-friendly as some of the other systems in the marketplace. But having said all that, that's enough to land S/4HANA at number 3 on our list. Coming in at number 2 on our list is Oracle Fusion Cloud ERP. And Oracle Fusion is another tier 1 provider that caters to larger organizations. It competes with SAP S/4HANA. And it's a really different product, though, than S/4HANA. When you look at Oracle versus SAP, they couldn't be much different other than the fact that they're chasing a lot of the same customers. Oracle is a lot more flexible, has more of an open architecture, provides a certain level of flexibility that other systems in the marketplace don't provide, especially in the tier 1 space. It also has a large ecosystem supporting it, so there's a lot of Oracle partners out there that support the product. You've got Oracle's rich history of all these investments and acquisitions they made over the years in different products like JD Edwards and Hyperion and a bunch of other systems they've acquired. And that's really built a very strong set of capabilities that Oracle is now offering under one umbrella with Oracle Fusion. So the product has breadth of capability. There's a lot of strong integration tools. There's more customization ability and flexibility in the products. It's scalable and can be integrated with other third-party solutions a bit easier than some of the other systems in the market. Now, the downside of Oracle Fusion is, first of all, that it's somewhat of a complex implementation when you look at it. There's a complex series of products in the suite of Oracle Fusion applications, and that can create a certain amount of technical complexity when it comes to integrating even just these Oracle solutions. Now, the good news is, yes, Oracle provides strong integration tools, but it requires more integration because you've got different systems to pull together here. And just like SAP, sometimes Oracle implementations can cost more, take more time and resource commitments, and that can lead to challenges along the way too, and that sort of holds back Oracle in its implementations. And then finally, I'll say that Oracle Fusion might be overkill for some mid-market or smaller organizations that might actually be better suited for Oracle NetSuite. If they're looking for an Oracle product, they might be better suited to look at Oracle NetSuite. And so really understanding whether or not you should really be looking at Oracle Fusion or Oracle NetSuite in terms of where you are as an organization is important if you are going down the Oracle path. But having said all that, that's enough to land Oracle Fusion Cloud ERP at number 2 on our list. Now, coming in at number 1 is Microsoft Dynamics 365. Again, it's a repeat from last year. It was number 1 last year. And the reason that D365 fares so well on our list again is because it sort of falls right in the middle of being a big enough solution to provide tier 1 capabilities, but it has that smaller, flexible feel of a smaller system. And that really helps it cater to not only the small and mid-market, but especially the larger market. Now, to be clear, when I'm talking about Microsoft D365, at number one, we're talking about F&O, the finance and operations version of D365. Business Central is for smaller organizations. That is not in our top 10 list, but F&O is the one that we're referring here today. Now, D365 is a bit more flexible than other systems in the marketplace. It has that Microsoft look and feel, the integration with Copilot and SharePoint and some of the other Microsoft tools that are out there. That provides a certain amount of comfort and user adoption comfort that other systems may not have. And the product itself can tend to be a bit less expensive than an SAP or an Oracle when you look at the subscription costs compared to those solutions. Another strength of D365 is that they've built a pretty strong ecosystem of third-party developers that have taken the D365 product and tailored it for industry-specific needs. So that's a strength that provides a certain amount of flexibility and tailored approach for different markets that are out there. Now, the downside of Microsoft D365 is that oftentimes organizations find that it's a complex implementation because it is a complex product. It does a lot of different things, and that comes with a certain amount of complexity, cost, and risk. And probably the biggest weakness of Microsoft D365 is going to be its ecosystem of partners. Microsoft doesn't tend to control or have much say or influence over its ecosystem when you compare it to other vendors in the market. And that creates a high degree of variability and winners and losers, if you will, of Microsoft partners. So you've got some really good ones out there, but you've got some other ones out there that you wonder, why are they partners of Microsoft? So you've really got to do your due diligence when choosing a system integrator or reseller or a technical implementation partner for D365. But when you factor in all these strengths and weaknesses, that's enough to land D365 at number one on our list. Now, in addition to this top 10 list, it's worth calling out 3 honorable mentions. These are 3 systems that you can make a strong argument for being in the top 10 list and maybe replacing 3 that we have in the list. One of those is Sage X3. Sage X3 has not yet made our top 10 list, but it's always been right on the cusp and right on the border. And Sage X3 is great for small and mid-market organizations that are looking for an alternative to some of the bigger solutions. And it's also good for organizations that are looking for an alternative to, say, a NetSuite or an Acumatica, which were in our top 10 list. Sage X3 might be a good alternative if you're a smaller mid-market company and you're looking for another option to look at. Another honorable mention goes to Microsoft D365 Business Central. Now, we know that D365 F&O was number one on our list, but Business Central is a different product that did not make our top 10 list, but you can make a strong argument that it should. And the reason for that is because it's a cloud-based solution that Microsoft has owned for a long time now. It competes fairly well with NetSuite, and it's a great alternative for small and mid-market companies that are looking for an ERP system that's right-sized for their organization. And finally, the third honorable mention goes to Aptean. And Aptean is probably the one vendor in all these discussions we've had here today that people have not heard of. A lot of people have not heard of Aptean. That's because it owns a number of different products that are focused primarily on manufacturing and distribution, and a lot within food and beverage in particular. And so I would consider Aptean sort of a sleeper or a hidden gem within the ERP space, and that's something you may want to look at if you're in the manufacturing and distribution space especially. So these are 3 honorable mentions you may want to consider. The top 10 list you may want to consider, but again, take it all with a grain of salt because these are general criteria that we look at across the globe and across different industries. When you look at your specific needs, you may come up with a completely different top 10 list, as you should. In fact, when we're helping clients through their software selections, we often find that their top 3 or their top 4 shortlist looks entirely different than what we just talked about in our top 10 list here.
So that was our top 5, number 5 video of 2024. And that was the top ERP systems for 2025, according to Eric. It was an independent ranking, and it was talking about the best ERP software that we think is out there. That had just over 7,000 views. So Eric, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, that one's an interesting one because that one was published later in the year. I think we published that maybe in September, October, somewhere in there. So it's relatively recent. It's still, in the top 5 here. So it's maybe a little bit understated as far as how it's trending in general. But yeah, that one's always interesting. People love their top 10 rankings. They love comparing, comparison videos. They also love the ranking videos. Those seem to do really well. And every year we publish the top 10 list. That tends to be one of the top performing videos. And we've still got 4 more videos, the top 4 videos to get to. But first, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
My name is Eric Kimberling, and I'm the CEO and founder of Third Stage Consulting. Before we dive too far into today's content, I want to invite you to learn a little bit more about Third Stage Consulting, who we are and what we do. I've included a link to a video right here that describes Third Stage in a bit more detail. It talks about our story, our history, our philosophy, our clients, our service offerings, and that sort of thing. But in general, what Third Stage Consulting does is we're an independent and tech-agnostic consulting provider. We help clients through their entire digital transformation life cycles, beginning with digital strategy, software evaluation and selection, all the way through and including implementation planning, implementation readiness, and the actual implementation itself. We're technology agnostic, so we only represent our clients' best interests. We do not represent software vendors. But having said that, we work very closely with software vendors, all the leading players that you can imagine we've worked with, both in helping clients evaluate and select them, but also in helping clients implement those solutions as well. So we have a very broad, objective, agnostic view of the market that is meant to really represent your interest as you go through your digital transformation. I also encourage you to scan this QR code right here to get access to our resource center. This resource center has a ton of information, a ton of ebooks that are free. You have access to top 10 software rankings, playbooks for how to make your project more successful, guides to change management, YouTube videos, all kinds of stuff that are going to help you through your digital transformation. So I encourage you to scan this QR code to get access to those resources. And please feel free to reach out to me directly to brainstorm ideas about your project. Even if it's just informally, you want to bounce around some ideas and get some informal advice, I'd be happy to spend some time with you. So feel free to reach out to me. I've included my contact information below. You can also find it in the description field of this video as well.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 203. This is Eric Kimberling with Darian Chwialkowski of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformations. We help them reach the third stage of digital transformation. And this is the podcast that has everything to do with digital transformation, the tech-agnostic view of ERP, enterprise tech, and digital transformations in general. And we're counting down the top 4 or the top 10 videos from my YouTube channel of 2024. We're down to the top 4 now. We're actually at number 4. And we talked at number 5. Number 5 was the top 10 ERP systems of 2025. And the ranking videos and anything that compares specific vendors, those types of videos do really well. But another category of video that does really well on our YouTube channel is anything controversial or anything that runs counter to the mainstream industry narrative. And at number 4 is a video that I published that talks about the dark side of cloud, basically. We talk about how vulnerabilities of cloud and SaaS ERP software have finally been exposed. And this is one of those videos where we're putting stuff out that we believe to be true. We see it to be true all the time, but it's not necessarily what software vendors want you to hear. So that's, I think, why this video did so well. It had just over 9,000 views in 2024 so far. This is at number 4. Have vulnerabilities of cloud and SaaS ERP software finally been exposed?
So first, let's talk about what the advantages of cloud systems are. And this is something that I think we're all pretty familiar with. We know what some of the upside potential is of cloud systems. We don't have to maintain our internal systems and infrastructure. We don't have to hire as much staff to maintain that infrastructure. Some of the short-term costs might actually be cheaper for cloud systems because you don't have to make those big capital investments in new on-premise technology. And there's also constant upgrades and constant evolution of this technology to make sure that you're staying up to date with the current technologies. And then there's the whole side of analytics and artificial intelligence. With the emergence of these new technologies, we find that cloud systems are oftentimes better suited to support AI capabilities and data analytics capabilities, because now you have all your data in a central location that feeds into AI and analytics and some of the other capabilities that organizations have struggled to adapt, partially because they had fragmented, siloed on-premise systems. So these are just a few of the advantages of why organizations are moving towards cloud systems. And it's also important to recognize that even though there's value for organizations implementing technologies in the cloud, the real winners are the software vendors themselves. They make considerably more and materially more money off cloud subscriptions than they were ever making from on-prem systems. The investors of software vendors love it because it's recurring revenue that's very predictable, high margin, and steady. So for that reason, vendors are pushing extremely hard to move to the cloud, regardless of the pros and cons of what the impact is to customers. But having said all that, there is definite advantage to cloud systems. But what I want to do in the rest of this video is talk about what is the downside, what's the risk, and what's the dark side of cloud systems. Not necessarily to suggest that cloud systems will completely go away, but to suggest that there is a dark side that you need to be aware of as you continue through your digital transformation journey. So the first downside that's important to be aware of is the fact that oftentimes cloud technologies offer less flexibility than what you might have had with your on-premise systems. When you have your on-premise systems, you own that software, it's in your four walls, you're hosting it in your servers and your infrastructure, so you can do whatever you want with that technology. You can configure it how you want, you can customize it how you want, you can bolt on other applications however you want, and there's really no limitation to what you can do to the software. And this could be a good or bad thing depending on how far you go with customization and flexibility. But oftentimes what organizations find is that there's a bit of a culture shock when they move to a cloud-based system, especially if it's a multi-tenant software as a service type of solution where there's even less flexibility. But when you move to the cloud, because the whole premise of the cloud technology concept is that you're providing technology at scale to many organizations, that means that there's inherently less flexibility than if you had your own version, your own instance of the software that allowed you to do whatever you want. So it's important to recognize that there's limitations on flexibility. For some organizations, that's a good thing because they're trying to standardize operations and standardize business processes. But for most organizations, I'd say it is a culture shock and it's a difficult transition, especially if you're not used to operating in a cloud environment. So it's something to be aware of, something to plan for, and something to recognize that you'll have to invest more in organizational change management to get your team to adapt to cloud technologies. One of the biggest potential disadvantages of cloud technologies is that longer term, the costs are going to be higher than your on-premise systems in most cases. And the reason I say that is because on one hand, you're saving money in the short term because you don't have to make that big capital investment up front with cloud solutions. Instead, you have a lower annual cost, subscription cost that's ongoing. And over time, usually 5 to 7 years out is where that sort of break even happens. And suddenly, after 5 or 7 years, cloud systems tend to cost more than on-premise systems. Now, you could argue that you're getting more value out of cloud systems because you're getting more modern technologies, more capabilities, and potentially a higher ROI. But the fact of the matter is that your costs are likely to be higher in the long term when you factor in the total cost of ownership of those ongoing subscription costs that go into perpetuity. And guess what? Those subscription costs don't ever go away and they don't ever decrease. So the only thing they're going to do is go up from the time you first deploy cloud technologies. And not only that, but many cloud contracts have no limitations on how much a vendor can increase cloud costs and cloud subscription costs. So while the ROI may be there and it may be justifiable in terms of those rising costs, it's important to recognize that you're not going to save money longer term, despite what most cloud vendors will try to convince you of. The other thing to be aware of with cloud systems is that there's a certain lack of maturity that comes with many of the cloud systems in the marketplace. Now, I will say that there's a caveat here. This statement and this whole segment of this video does not apply to the native cloud systems. Systems like NetSuite, Salesforce, and Workday, for example. Those are 3 enterprise technologies that were born in the cloud, they were built for the cloud, and they've always been in the cloud for 20 plus years. So those systems are fairly mature and well established in the cloud. But if you set aside those established software solutions and you look at some of the legacy on-premise vendors like SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, Epicor, Infor, etc., what you find is that those systems are complete rewrites to the cloud. So in other words, all those capabilities that had been developed over decades of R&D and investments in the product now are suddenly overnight trying to move those same capabilities into a rewritten version of a cloud solution. And that just doesn't happen overnight. It's going to take years for a lot of these on-premise legacy vendors to move all of those capabilities over to the cloud. But having said that, there's a lot of capabilities that they've already built for the cloud that far exceed and surpass what they might have had with their on-premise version. So it's sort of a double-edged sword. You're getting some new capabilities with the cloud solutions, but in many cases, when you look at things like advanced manufacturing or advanced planning, advanced budgeting, things of that nature, a lot of times software vendors don't have that extended capability built for the cloud yet, or if they do, it's very simplified and not quite as robust as what they had before. So just be aware that there's a lack of maturity that comes with a lot of these systems in the marketplace. Doesn't mean you shouldn't move to the cloud necessarily, but it does mean you have to figure out what you're going to do to address those gaps and those risks in your transformation. Now, in addition to increasing costs over time, I would say the other biggest factor to consider as a potential downside and a potential day of reckoning for cloud systems in the future is the whole idea of vendor lock-in. So you have this concept where now all of a sudden, if you have all of your enterprise technologies and processes stored with one vendor in the cloud, suddenly that vendor has you locked in. It's a lot more difficult to move to another system. In other words, the switching costs are very high with the cloud compared to on-premise. And for software vendors, this is a dream. This is exactly what they want. They want you to be locked in. They want you to go all in on their solution and invest more of your IT spend with them for longer term. So it's a good thing for software vendors, but the question becomes what happens over time, let's just say 10 or 15 years from now, when you deploy all these cloud technologies, especially if it's enterprise-wide, and then you find that for some reason your business changes and evolves a certain direction and the software changes and evolves in a different direction that may or may not meet the needs of your organization. So this is all very important to recognize and understand, and there's ways to hedge for this. One way to hedge is if you're going to move to the cloud, perhaps you don't put all your eggs in one basket and you deploy multiple cloud technologies. Not only would you get better capabilities potentially by having more of a best-of-breed approach, but now suddenly you don't have that vendor lock-in where your entire enterprise is exposed to the risk of having one vendor manage all of your systems, all of your data, and a lot of your IT spend. So just be aware of the whole concept of vendor lock-in, and there's a lot of ways you can hedge and diversify your risk, but you just want to be aware of it. So these are some of the things that lead me to believe that we may see a dark underbelly of cloud systems in the future, in the not too distant future. It may also create somewhat of a severe backlash against cloud systems. We have yet to see, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on the cloud. Do you think the cloud is here to stay? Do you think there's a dark side? Do you think there'll be a backlash at some point in the future? I know this is a very controversial topic that runs counter to what most industry pundits will say, so I'd love to hear your feedback as well.
So that's number 4 video in our top 10 lists. Vulnerabilities of cloud and SaaS ERP software finally been exposed. I'm curious to hear comments from people, any thoughts you have around the cloud and SaaS and some of the dark side and hidden costs, those sorts of things that we talk about in the video. I'm curious to hear from the audience what their thoughts are there. But that was number 4 with just over 9,000 views in 2024, which brings us to number 3. What have we got at number 3, Darian?
Yeah, number 3, our top 3 here, getting down to it. This one had just over 11,000 views in 2024, and it's another training video. This is an overall view, though, of training instead of a specific training. So it's an ERP software training, a detailed introduction to ERP systems and implementations. So we're going to go ahead and play you guys a clip of this video.
We work with a lot of different software implementations, a lot of different project teams, a lot of different industries. And what we wanted to do here today is provide a training course that goes deep into understanding what the different ERP systems are in the marketplace, what it takes to make those ERP implementations successful, how to understand the change management and the risks and failure points of implementations, as well as some case studies so that we can understand what not to do as well as what to do during our implementations. So this training course is meant to be a deep dive into understanding ERP systems and ERP implementations. This is going to be relevant whether you're a project team member going through an ERP implementation for the first time, whether you're trying to brush up on your skills, whether you're a consultant, whether you're an executive team member trying to figure out what exactly you should know about ERP systems and what understanding you need to have before embarking on an implementation. So this is meant to be a deeper dive than a lot of the videos you'll find on my YouTube channel. I encourage you to share this training material and this training video with anyone else on your team that you think might benefit from this and your overall project team and your colleagues as well. Now, the way we've broken up this training session here today is we've broken it into a number of different modules. And you can see the agenda here in front of you. We're going to start off by talking about ERP software in general. This is especially helpful if you haven't yet chosen an ERP system or if you're still trying to figure out and narrow down what system or systems might be the best fit for your organization. Once we've done that, we'll dive into implementation planning, the implementation itself, organizational change, basically everything you need to know about how to implement ERP systems effectively. And then we'll get into some case studies. We'll talk about ERP failures and some of the lessons from them, as well as successful ones and some of the lessons we can take away from organizations that have been successful in their ERP implementations. First, it helps to understand what exactly ERP software is. So let's start off by giving a quick high-level overview before we dive into specific software vendors and ways to implement the system, we'll start off with this basic foundational understanding to start. ERP software, or enterprise resource planning software, has been around for a long time. It's helped a lot of organizations improve and become more effective and efficient. But what exactly is ERP software? I'm going to give that answer here today. I've been in the ERP software space now for over 20 years. And whenever I'm talking to family or students or someone who's not familiar with the ERP space that I'm in, people often ask, what in the world is ERP and what does that mean? I mentioned that ERP stands for Enterprise Resource Planning. And ERP is actually an evolution from some older technology that was really originated with a lot of manufacturing organizations. And that software was called MRP, Material Resource Planning. So the origin of MRP came to be when a lot of larger manufacturing organizations were finding that they were struggling with managing their entire manufacturing operations. They had trouble tracking customer orders and tracking demand, tracking what kind of parts and supplies they would need to purchase to be able to meet and fulfill customer demand. So MRP systems were a way to handle that. It was a way to manage the tracking of what supplies and raw materials we might need to manufacture for our customers. It was a way to manage the manufacturing shop floor so that we could prioritize orders and make sure that we maximized throughput. And it was really a way to address the whole movement in the 90s toward lean manufacturing and trying to maximize manufacturing efficiency. And in the US, a lot of US manufacturers were struggling with manufacturing efficiency and manufacturing quality, and they were being beat by Japanese manufacturing organizations at the time. So MRP systems were a way to help organizations of all origins and all nationalities to help them better become more efficient and more effective. So over time, MRP evolved and morphed into something more than just a manufacturing solution. It started to focus on warehouse management and procurement and financials and accounting, even HCM or human capital management or customer relationship management on the sales side. It took the core of MRP and started to expand in other parts of the enterprise to where organizations were moving towards single systems that could tie together the entire organization, provide one unified data set, provide a common workflow across the organization, and for lack of a better term, provide one system that provided all the operations and data and transparency into what was happening enterprise-wide. And so that's the whole evolution of how ERP came to be. It really traces its origins back decades ago when enterprise technology was first emerging. Now, there are a plethora of ERP software providers in the marketplace. The biggest ones, the ones that are most commonly used by bigger organizations, are companies like SAP. Oracle is another one. Microsoft provides its own ERP solution. Those are the three biggest ones, and a lot of organizations and industry analysts will refer to those larger ERP systems as the tier 1 ERP systems. Those are the ones that are typically better suited for larger organizations, multinationals, more complex organizations, multi-location types of organizations. Those tier 1 providers are generally trying to provide a breadth of functionality that can meet the needs of those organizations. There's also tier 2 ERP providers, and these are the providers that are more niche-focused solutions. They might focus on one industry, might focus on one set of capabilities. Just to give you a few examples, Epicor and Infor, for example, are two manufacturing ERP systems that are very common in the manufacturing space, but you don't see them a lot in other industries. You don't see them, for example, in a lot of financial services organizations or professional services organizations. They tend to focus more on manufacturing and distribution and nothing else. So that is another example or another segment of the ERP space, is that whole tier 2 market. And then you have your tier 3 or industry niche solutions that there are probably dozens or hundreds of different ERP solutions that fall into that segment. They're either smaller, simpler solutions that can provide capabilities to specific industries, or perhaps certain functions or capabilities within ERP. They may not even be providing full ERP capability. They may be focusing on just one small segment within ERP. And like I said, there's a ton of different options and solutions in that space. So overall, if we look at all the different types of ERP systems out there, there are easily dozens, if not hundreds, of ERP systems that can be used for your organization. Typically, the going in proposition with ERP implementations is that you're going to have one ERP system that can do everything that you would need technology to do for your organization. Now, that is an ideal situation. It's a perfect world scenario, but the reality is most organizations have unique needs and unique challenges that can't be met by one single ERP system that's trying to be everything to everyone. So what the single ERP system model has done is it's created a niche or a void that's being filled by what we call best of breed ERP systems. And these are systems that are not meant to be one single ERP system that's going to be everything for everyone within your organization, but it might be that you're focusing on different segments of your business. So for example, within your sales organization, you might have CRM or customer relationship management software. Within your HR department, you might use a separate or a different human capital management software that specializes in that. And Workday, for example, is a good example of a system that provides just HCM capabilities. You might have a different system that provides financial and accounting capabilities. And you could also, in addition to those examples, be using a core back office ERP system to tie it all together. So best of breed systems is a common trend that we're seeing in the market. And it's in some ways more complex because now you have multiple systems that you have to tie together. But in other ways, it provides more flexibility. It provides more precise fit with what your unique business needs might be. And there's certainly trade-offs to both the best of breed model as well as the single ERP model. But when talking about ERP, it's important to look at the whole picture. What are those spectrum and continuum of options available to you in the marketplace? You've probably seen that ERP implementations quite commonly fail. In fact, many statistics put the failure rate at above 80% of organizations that try to implement ERP, whether it's a tier 1 system, a tier 2 or 3 system, or a single ERP, best of breed ERP. Doesn't really matter. The failure rate is fairly high. So the question becomes, if the technology is great and there's so much demand for this technology, how could they possibly fail as often as they do? And if you check out my channel and some of the other videos on my channel, just search the word failure, and you'll find a bunch of videos I've created about how to avoid failure, why projects fail, what some of the common challenges are. But in a nutshell, the reason ERP implementations typically fail is not because of the technology, but it's because of the operational and the people side of things. The technology in general is very robust, it's very sophisticated, it's innovative, it can do a lot of different things. That's usually not the problem, although technology can create complications during implementation. But the more common challenges and problems with ERP implementations are that we haven't adequately addressed our business process improvements, we haven't adequately addressed our organizational change management or our people needs. So in other words, and to put it simply, people don't like to change. And because they don't like to change, new technology, no matter how great it is going to be difficult for your organization to adapt to. So in its simplest terms, people and processes are why ERP implementations fail. Like I said, I encourage you to watch some of the other videos on my YouTube channel that go into that topic in more detail. But in general, that's why implementations fail. So the question becomes, how do we implement ERP software? If most of them fail, what can we do differently to implement well? And to simplify and to summarize what I've also talked about in other videos on my YouTube channel, the first thing is to find the right software or technology that's the best fit for your organization. That's kind of the first step. That's the minimum ante that you need to be able to succeed, is to make sure that the software or technology you're implementing is a good fit with what your needs are, and make sure you get an independent assessment and view, an objective evaluation of the different options in the marketplace so you can find the best technology for your organization. A second critical success factor is to ensure that your organization is aligned on what it wants to be when it grows up. A lot of times organizations are trying to implement ERP software at a time of turmoil, at a time of misalignment, or at a time of strategic misalignment where the organization isn't on the same page with the direction it's going, it doesn't have a clear vision, and then you try to overlay new technology on top of that, and that's a recipe for failure. So making sure you have clear alignment on your overall organization is very important. And again, I've included some videos below that will help you further dive into that topic. And then the implementation itself. When we focus on the implementation, it's important not to focus too much on the technology, but to shift some of the time, resources, and attention from technology over to the people and process side of things. If we do the people and process side of things very well, and we also have alignment, and we've also picked the right software or technology for our organization, we have the best chances to succeed. But the problem is most organizations fail in one or more of those three critical success factors. And like I said, I encourage you to download some of the content I've included links to below that'll dive more into what you need to do to be successful for your ERP implementation. The ERP software had its origins many years ago with some very simple types of objectives it was trying to accomplish. It was just trying to track inventory and orders and activities better within an organization. Sounds simple enough, but over the years, it's evolved into more than that. It's not only trying to tie together an organization, provide one common single source of truth for what's happening in the organization, but it's also now trying to introduce more advanced technologies and capabilities into ERPs. So for example, there's new artificial intelligence that's helping organizations automate some of their business processes better. There's machine learning that looks for patterns and exceptions to things as simple as accounts payable processing of invoices. Machine learning, for example, can automate the accounts payable process and use artificial intelligence to flag the exceptions or the things that look like outliers or the things that look like could be potential problems in your accounts payable invoice processing. So that's just one minute example of how machine learning and artificial intelligence is being used to take ERP to a whole nother level. You also have blockchain, which is being used by many organizations in pharmaceutical and food companies, for example. They need to track every raw material and part in an entire production process, an entire distribution process, so that if there's ever a recall or a regulatory problem, blockchain can be used to trace problems back to the supplier, and that's a new technology that's being provided. And then finally, one other common trend we're seeing is Internet of Things. If you have an Apple Watch and your Apple Watch is tracking your daily activity, that's an example of Internet of Things. It's tracking that information, it's storing it in the cloud, and what you do with that information and how information like that could tie back to an enterprise is very important. For example, a lot of manufacturing organizations will have Internet of Things type devices out on the shop floor that will be tracking data on the shop floor that will then tie back to the ERP system so that you can see complete visibility into what is not only happening within the corporate headquarters, but also what's happening out on the shop floor. So those are just a few examples of some of the trends that are emerging in the ERP space. If managed correctly, implemented correctly, and leveraged correctly, organizations can go to the next level in their respective journeys. But it requires the right focus, the right discipline, and also just finding the right technology.
All right, so that was our number 3 and our top 3 videos from 2024. And that was another training video. You guys really seem to enjoy watching those, and you must learn a lot from them. But we're getting down into the top 2 now, Eric. So what do we have for number 2?
Yeah, number 2 is another controversial topic. It's about Agile. And I know there's a lot of Agile purists out there, people that love Agile, and nothing wrong with Agile. But in this video, we sort of challenge the silver bullet mentality of Agile. And we talk about how Agile leads to digital transformation in ERP software failure. So the whole idea here is, what is that dark side or the downside risk of Agile, even though there is upside potential and there's benefit to Agile in some ways. If you overcorrect and go too far down the path of Agile, it can lead to problems. And that's exactly what we talk about in this video. So this video came in at number 2. It had 11,000 views in 2024. This is how Agile leads to digital transformation in ERP software failure.
Real quickly, I want to describe the difference between Agile and Waterfall. Waterfall is a traditional software development methodology where you have clear sequential milestones and checkpoints along the way. Agile, on the other hand, is more focused on speed to value. It's focused on implementing technology quickly and getting feedback quickly from your user group. And I'm not going to dive into all the nuances of Agile versus Waterfall, but if you'd like to learn more about what Agile is and how it's different from Waterfall, I encourage you to check out this video right here on my YouTube channel. That video is solely focused on just differentiating between the two to help you define which makes the most sense for you. But what I'll do here today instead is talk about why Agile has become such a big deal. And the reason Agile is such a big trend right now is because historically, ERP implementations and digital transformations have failed. Organizations have taken too long to get the value they wanted out of the system. They've spent too much money, too much time, too many resources, and in many cases, they don't ever get the business value they expect out of the system. So what software vendors have done in a smart way It said, well, if waterfall might be the problem, then why don't we go with a faster agile approach? And that's the mentality and sort of the pendulum swinging the other way. To add to this trend, there's another trend in the entrepreneurial community called lean startups and agile startups and minimum viable products. There's all these trends in the small business space that's focused on speed. How do we do things faster? How do we get products to market faster? How do we get a minimum viable product out there and then get feedback from customers? So there's two trends kind of happening in parallel that are fueling this focus on agile and the focus on speed to value. And that's why Agile has become such a big part of digital transformations today. And it's also a great sales tactic because now software vendors can say, hey, I know our projects have failed in the past, and I know our projects have struggled in the past, but now we have an Agile methodology that'll solve the world's problems. So what I want to do in the rest of this video is talk about how Agile is not, in fact, solving the world's problems. And in many cases, it's creating new problems that we need to be aware of. One of the core tenets or philosophies as it relates to Agile is that we don't want to take a lot of time up front defining our business processes, defining our requirements, defining end-to-end business processes and workflows, because that takes time. It slows down the process of getting technology out there and getting speed to value. So what Agile does, it says we're not going to do that. We're just going to start deploying technologies. We'll find smaller problems throughout the organization and we'll deploy technology to fix it. And we'll get feedback from end users and then we'll tweak it and adopt it and pivot. And we keep going through this iterative cycle. Sounds fair enough, right? But the problem with this approach is most clients we work with, especially larger, complex, and multinational organizations, are trying to standardize their operations. They're trying to get a better view of their end-to-end business processes. They want to improve their end-to-end business processes, and they want to start acting like one company. They already have 10 or 15 or 20 different ways of operating. Now they're using this transformation as a way to say, we want to act like one company. We want to get efficiency gains from having standard business processes. We want to consolidate teams in some cases. So those things all point to the fact that we need to take the time up front to have a strategic direction and have a clear vision of what it is we want to get out of this project, rather than just simply deploying new technology and seeing what happens. So in order for us to have a truly strategic impact on our future state and where we end up as part of our digital transformation, we have to be sure not to take too much of an agile approach, especially early on in the project. We need to take that time up front to define the roadmap, the blueprint, the business process changes, the requirements, all that stuff, because that's what's going to enable us to get the benefits we expect. Now, once we get to the implementation of technology after that, then we can start to introduce agile concepts. I'm going to come back to that point later in this video. But the key is you don't want to start off with a full-on agile approach out of the gates if your goal is to standardize operations or to consolidate operations and to get true end-to-end business value out of your transformation. I talked a moment ago about how Agile doesn't necessarily support the need for strategic direction and focusing on what you want to be when you grow up. And I want to focus a little bit more on that and peel that back a little bit more and talk about business processes, because business processes are one of the key focal points of any digital transformation. Most organizations are trying to improve their processes. They're trying to have some deliberate approach to how they create their new business processes, and they want to ensure that they actually roll out these new business processes as part of their transformation. If we create new technology and just put it in the hands of end users as fast as we can, that doesn't necessarily translate to new or better business processes. So taking the time up front to actually map out and sketch out your future state operating model, your end-to-end business processes, the way you're going to standardize or change the processes, how you're going to integrate processes, how you're going to organize the people around those business processes, that's all part of redesigning your organization and defining what the organization is going to look like in the future. And Agile doesn't necessarily support that. In fact, Agile runs counter to that concept, because if you think about it, what I'm advocating for is more that waterfall approach where you take the time up front to define your end-to-end processes, define what you want your re-engineered processes to be, and then implement technologies behind that. Whereas Agile would probably flip that around and say, let's get technology out there and we'll use that as a way to educate ourselves and inform ourselves how we might improve and make our business better. Now, the other part of this too is if we're going to invest heavily in new technologies, which most organizations are when they go through digital transformations, it's not enough to say we're just going to put the technology out there and see what happens and hope for the best and hope that we get business value out of it. Most organizations that our team works with in all countries of the world focus on how do we get business value. If we're going to invest X amount of money in technology, where's the business value? If we don't see the business value, then maybe we don't invest as much in the technology. In order to understand what the business value is, you have to understand what the business processes are going to be in the future and how they're going to change and how they're going to be improved. So all this is to say, you need that time up front, which is very anti-agile. You need that time up front to define your future state processes, your requirements, and the overall design of the organization and the operations. So if you've listened to this whole thing so far, you might think that I am completely against Agile. I hate Agile, never want to see it anywhere in digital transformation. Fortunately, that's not true. I do think there's value and merit in Agile, but only in moderation, just like anything. We don't want to double down and go all in on Agile when it doesn't make sense to our organization, but there are ways that we can leverage the value of an Agile mentality. And the key is, where do we use it? When do we use it? How often do we use it? And what's the right timing? That's the key thing. What's the timing for moving into more of an Agile approach? And just to generalize and to summarize, I would say the best way to think about it is, if you treat your upfront planning and blueprinting stages of your digital transformation in a waterfall approach, that's going to make a lot of sense, especially if you then shift into an Agile approach. And when you shift into that Agile approach, that's where you can start to accelerate and speed things up. And that's where, by having that clear blueprint and that clear roadmap that you've defined in the upfront stages of your project, that's actually going to enable a better Agile approach that goes faster later on. In fact, I would argue, if you took two exact same projects in parallel, run one that's fully Agile, run the other one that starts waterfall, then moves to Agile, the one that starts waterfall and moves to Agile, I would argue, is going to be implemented a lot faster and deliver value a lot faster than the other scenario where you start with Agile. And the reason for that is, if you start with Agile, you're sort of going in circles and you're meandering through your project and experimentation and all that stuff that ultimately will take more time and money than if you just took the time to plan and create a clear roadmap up front before you shifted into Agile mode. So that's one way to look at it, is start with waterfall, move to Agile later on. Now, there are a couple scenarios where I would say maybe Agile does make sense from the start. One would be if you're a high growth organization. If you're a fast growing, fast moving technology or a younger company, chances are pretty high that even if you wanted to take a waterfall approach and take that time to define business processes and requirements up front, you wouldn't be able to, because it's like a moving target. You're growing and changing so fast that it doesn't make sense to start off with a waterfall approach. Agile is actually going to serve you a lot better. That's where you want to leverage Agile from the start, because as the company evolves and changes, you can be baking technology into those changes along the way. The other scenario where we see Agile work really well, even in larger organizations, is if you're focused on innovation. If your technology initiative, or part of your technology initiative, is focused on creating innovative processes and new ways of thinking, those parts of your transformation are very well suited for Agile. So let me start by saying what isn't innovative. If you're implementing a back office accounting system, for example, that's not an innovative use of technology. It might be needed, but it's not innovative. That's a scenario where you probably want to take more of a traditional waterfall and then Agile approach. But if you're talking about, for example, artificial intelligence, an emerging technology that none of us fully understand yet, and organizations certainly haven't figured out how they're going to use AI yet, that's a great candidate for an Agile approach, because we don't know enough about AI and how it could be used in order to create these new business processes. But if we put the technology in people's hands and run some pilots and do some innovative experiments in how we could improve our operations, that's a very Agile approach. So with those newer emerging technologies and the focus on innovation, or those parts of your business that are very innovative, that might be a good candidate for more of an Agile approach. So the bottom line here is, Agile can be good, but it can also be bad. It can be helpful, but it can also be destructive. And we need to understand when and where and how to use Agile. And hopefully I've conveyed some ideas on how to do that here today.
All right, that was the number 2 most watched video of 2024 on my YouTube channel. That was how Agile leads to digital transformation and ERP software failure. Love to hear your comments in the description or in the comments below about what your thoughts about Agile are. What has your experience been with Agile? What do you think the pros and cons of Agile are? I'd love to hear your comments. Anytime we have a controversial video like that, it's always fun to get a dialogue going. So I'd love to hear your feedback in the comments below. But we've got one more video, which actually was number 1 by a long shot in 2024. The number 2 video we just watched did well. It had 11,000 views, but that was sort of a distant second to the number 1 video. So we're going to play that for you here in just a second. We'll come back with the number 1 video, the most watched video of 2024. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
I'm excited to announce the release of our 2025 Digital Transformation Report. It's available now on the Third Stage Consulting website, www.thirdstage-consulting.com. This report gives you an unbiased, technology-agnostic insight to help you optimize your organization's projects for success. Get your copy today using the QR code in front of me or on our website.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S/4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 203. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Chwialkowski, and in this new year, we have been counting down the top 10 videos of 2024, and we're up to number one. This is the number one video of the year. It's another training video. It's a video that was a distant number one. It led the pack by a long shot for the year. This had 26,000 views compared to number two had 11,000 views. So more than double the next video in our ranking. And it's a supply chain management course, which anytime I put anything out about supply chain management, those videos tend to do pretty well, even though the video or the channel itself is more focused on digital transformation more broadly. There's something about supply chain management. Whenever I publish something on supply chain management, it tends to do really well, and this one did really well. This is Intro to Supply Chain Management, the complete training course, and we'll play you just a clip from that. But this was the number one video on my YouTube channel from 2024 with just over 26,000 views.
One of the common disciplines that we work very closely with and in is supply chain management. A lot of clients we work with come to us and ask us to help them automate or improve their supply chains as part of a broader digital or business transformation. There's a lot to learn about supply chain management. I personally love supply chain management. I studied it extensively and focused on it during my master's program when I was getting my business degree. And so it's something that I'm very fascinated by and passionate about. So what I want to do today is share some training with you and really dive into supply chain management. Now, this training is broken up into several different modules, but I'll summarize the overall flow and agenda for today. First of all, we're going to dive into what is supply chain management, how supply chains work, and what some of the different nuances are, the nomenclature, the terms and definitions, and things of that nature. Then we're going to talk about why supply chains are broken and some strategies to improve supply chains. And then toward the end of this training, we'll get into some case studies, talking about lessons from some successful supply chains as well as lessons from those that have struggled. So that's the general layout. You can find a complete breakdown of the different modules in the description below, and you can jump ahead or back however you want throughout the training, but that's the general flow. First, it helps to just do a 20,000-foot flyover of what is supply chain management, really break it down to its basic, simplest form. So what we're going to do in this first module is dive into what is supply chain management. The first characteristic of a digital supply chain is improved business processes. And even though the topic of this video is what is a digital supply chain, in order to have a digital supply chain, you need to start with your business processes and define what you want those business processes to be. And the cool thing about supply chains, but also the complex thing about supply chains, is that they're very broad and cross-functional, and they're very complex. So if you think about the scope and the span of a supply chain management end-to-end process, it starts with a customer order, and it goes through procurement of materials, production of materials, the storage of materials in a warehouse, the shipment of materials to a customer or to a third-party distributor, and ultimately the collection of cash, and ultimately the forecasting of what might happen in the future as it relates to that entire cycle. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail of how a supply chain works, but I do have another video on my YouTube channel that you should check out right here that talks about what is a supply chain and how does a supply chain work in general. And that's where we get into the business process aspect of a supply chain. But for this video, what I want to talk about is what are some of the ways that we can convert our supply chain processes into a digital supply chain. And the first way to do that is to focus on defining what you want your future state supply chain to look like in the future. I'll give you an example of one process improvement that's very common in supply chains in the 2020s. So when the pandemic happened in 2020, a lot of supply chain managers found that they were overly dependent on certain vendors. So they had certain vendors within the supply chain that they were solely dependent on, and they didn't have a good backup for if something happened to that vendor or if that vendor wasn't able to fulfill demand. So one of the reasons why supply chains have broken down so much in the 2020s is not because there's been a massive breakdown in the overall supply chain, but that little pieces within the supply chain broke down that caused a domino effect throughout the entire supply chain. So one example of a process improvement might be to diversify your vendor base. So if you notice the key raw materials are being sourced by the same vendor, you might look at that and say, let's change our business process to ensure that we have a way to diversify the risk of single vendors and that we have a better process for managing vendors and making sure that we have plan Bs for when there's a problem with a vendor. Another potential process improvement would be to measure and track the vendor supplier scorecards. So how well are suppliers performing and who are the best in performance? That would be a process improvement that you can instill within your supply chain. But the key thing here is in order to become a digital supply chain, you need to define what you want those process improvements to be first, then go out and find the technologies that are going to be able to best help you do that. Now, once we have a high-level vision of what we want our business processes to look like within our supply chain, now we can start to go to the market and look at what are some of the potential options for our supply chains. So if we want to automate and improve our supply chains, we have a lot of different options. We have supply chain management specific software. Vendors such as Manhattan Associates and Blue Yonder will provide technologies that automate an entire end-to-end supply chain, and that's all they do. They focus on supply chain management. You also have, even within the domain of supply chain management, you have even more focused solutions that focus specifically on specific functions within supply chain management. So for example, procurement software. There's vendors such as Ariba, which is owned by SAP, that focuses only on procurement within the supply chain. You have logistics software, you have transportation management software, you have freight management software, a lot of different technologies that can focus on individual pieces of the supply chain, or you can go find a broader, more complete and integrated supply chain management solution. Or finally, another option is a enterprise-wide ERP sort of a system that ties together your entire organization, not just your supply chain, but also all the other functions within your organization, like finance and accounting and customer service, order management, all that good stuff. So the message here is that there's a lot of different technologies at your disposal when you're going to implement a digital supply chain. For more research and best practices around the specific types of technologies you might consider for your supply chain modernization efforts, I encourage you to download our digital transformation report, which highlights independent reviews and software rankings, as well as best practices for your supply chain management initiatives. And in that report, you'll find a number of our objective and independent reviews of some of the different supply chain technologies out there. And that should give you a good starting point for resources and vendors you may want to start to consider as you look to move towards a digital supply chain. Now, once we've looked at business processes and defined what we want our business processes to look like, we've identified potential technology improvements within our digital supply chain. Now we need to look at the human aspect of our supply chain. How do we improve the performance of people that are involved in our supply chain management functions throughout the organization? And this is arguably the most important part, because if you do the operational stuff, you do the technological stuff without the human piece of it, none of the first two categories matter, because people aren't executing and behaving the way you need them to operate with the digital supply chain. So this is where the discipline of organizational change management comes into play. This is where we need to have a clear adoption and change strategy to ensure that our people are coming along for the ride. They need to understand what new business processes are going to affect them, how those processes are going to affect them, how they're going to use technologies to do their jobs going forward, and ultimately what their new roles and responsibilities are going to be. Because oftentimes what we see in supply chain modernization efforts is that people automate a lot of their jobs, and a lot of their job functions go away. And you need to figure out how you're going to replace those job functions with something higher value and something that's going to be of even more importance to the organization. And without that, not only are you not getting the benefit and the value of this new technology, but you're also causing people to panic because they don't understand what their new job roles and responsibilities are going to be. So defining a change strategy and a adoption strategy is very important as part of your digital supply chain efforts. Now, if you're looking for a deeper dive into what change management is and what some of the major work streams are that you should consider as you look to the human performance of your supply chain, I encourage you to download our Guide to Organizational Change Management, which covers a number of best practices and lessons for how to address the human side of any sort of transformation, whether it's a supply chain transformation or a digital transformation or a ERP initiative, whatever the case may be. I encourage you to download that. You can find a link to that in the description field below. Now, so far we've talked about the people, process, and technology foundation for a digital supply chain. The next step is to make sure that we've identified the analytics and the metrics that we use to drive and manage our supply chains going forward. This is where data and visibility into the data becomes so important. And so what we want to do here is make sure that we don't just implement new technology just to automate processes, even though it will help us automate processes, but also to ensure that we have better visibility as a result of that technology. And this requires us making sure that we clean up the data and have accurate data that we load into the new technologies, but also making sure that we manage and preserve that data to make sure it doesn't become corrupt over time. And this goes back to the previous point I made about organizational change management and the human adoption component of digital supply chains. You want to make sure that people aren't doing things that unintentionally corrupt the data or cause the data to be inaccurate, which then leads to bad decision making because you don't have accurate insights into your supply chain and into your overall business. So another step and another important component of a digital supply chain is making sure that you have good data, good analytics, good reporting, and good visibility into the overall supply chain. Now, these are just a few of the components of effective digital supply chains. In order to be effective, you ultimately want to define a digital supply chain strategy that makes the most sense for you, and it should be something that's tailored to your organization and your overall goals and objectives as an organization and as a supply chain.
So there you have it. That was the #1 video of 2024, the video that was most watched on my YouTube channel. And of course, there's 9 others that did really well as well. And on my channel, we publish over 100 videos a year, over 100 videos as far as the polished, professionally done videos. And then there's the podcast, there's the YouTube shorts. We publish a lot of stuff. Hundreds over the course of a year, but those are the 10 that sort of rose to the top and outperformed all the others for whatever reason. So I'm curious to hear what video you liked best, what topic you'd like to hear us cover more. I'd love to hear your comments in the chat below. Share with us what you think you'd want to see more of or less of, or how we could pivot or make this content even better for you guys. So I'd love to hear your feedback below. But Darian, thanks for putting together this list. This is a super helpful and kind of a fun change of pace for this podcast.
Yeah, for sure. It was fun to go through what content the audience seems to enjoy and watch the most from our channel. So it's always good for us to look at that and to share with you guys. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. But Happy New Year, everybody. We have a lot of fun things planned for 2025 for this podcast. So make sure you stay tuned. This is only the first one of the year. So make sure you stay tuned and watch what we're going to be posting in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. We're always looking for new guests and trying to push the boundaries of what we cover and trying to make things more interesting. So love to hear your suggestions too. Any guest suggestions you have or topics you want us to cover on this podcast, I'd love to hear from you. So thanks for being part of this podcast. Happy New Year, everyone. We'll see you next week on the next episode of Transformation Ground Control every Wednesday. You can find new episodes. Just go to transformationgroundcontrol.com. In the meantime, hope your new year is off to a great start, and we'll see you next week on the next episode of Transformation Ground Control. Take care.